In just a few minutes, polls will close in that special election in Tennessee's 7th Congressional District. Republican Matt Van Epps and Democratic State Representative Afton Ben are squaring off. And according to Punchbowl News, Republicans are bracing for a morale hit with a race that becomes too close for comfort. Trump won this district by 22 points last year, folks. If Van Epps wins, and it's not guaranteed he will, it will likely be by a much smaller margin, raising serious questions about Republicans standing ahead of the midterms. I would say if, that number is a small single-digit, there are problems in the red state of Tennessee, as there are in a lot of red states right now, because as we've talked about at this table for some time, there is a crack in the land of Republican and Republicanism and MAGA, and that confrontation that's coming has been reflected in a lot of these special elections that have been lost, and have now, in some sense, not completely, in some sense, I think, come to a bit of a head in Tennessee, because that's your backyard. That's your backyard. You can talk about Maine, you can talk about stuff in the Northeast, you can even, sort of slough off the West, but this is your backyard. This is the South. And you losing potentially single digits or winning single digits.
Well, the South got something to say, child. They got something to say. We have some sound from voters today in Tennessee who were talking about the importance of affordability. Take a listen to the people.
What was on your mind the most when you cast your ballot?
The economy. The amount, what it costs average Americans to live today.
There's too many rising costs. These tariffs are nuts. So affordability was the main thing for me.
The rising prices of food, the rising prices of energy, everything, and then to have President Trump, everything's down. Prices are down. You're going to have a more affordable Thanksgiving than you did under Joe Biden. It blows my mind that someone like him can sit up there and just flat lie.
That is a sample of some voters down there. Obviously, there are also voters that are supportive of the Republican candidate. But I think that this is an example that you cannot spin away someone's lived reality. And the lived reality of people in this country, if you are not among the wealthiest of people in this country, is things are a little bit tighter when it comes to the wallet situation. The prices are high. I will lastly note this is a district that was redrawn in 2022. So this district used to be a solidly dim blue district. They kind of cracked the district that represented Nashville up so that it could look like it does now.
Can I say real quick one last point? It proves my point. You may draw the lines however you want, but it does not dictate how the voters are going to vote. And tonight in Tennessee in the 7th, that could prove even more so.
I interviewed State Representative Afton Ben last week. She was laser focused on affordability, talking about ACA, talking about grocery prices. And she also offered this invitation to voters. She said, regardless of who you have voted for in the past, I am happy to be your candidate. And I think as much as there will be conversations among Republicans behind closed doors, if in fact Van Epps wins by 5 points tonight, 6 points tonight, there also have to be a lot of conversations among Democrats about what it is they can learn from the campaign.
Talk about it. Can we learn from Trump? Just put the thing up on the screen. Look at the president. What Democrats can learn from is do not fall asleep in the meeting, okay? Sitting right next to you. Stay alert.
At the top of the hour on All In, Chris is going to be joined by Arizona Senator Mark Kelly. That is coming up next, 8 p.m. Eastern on MS Now. Stick with us.
About to hit the table.
That does it for the weeknight. We'll see you back here tomorrow, 7 p.m. Eastern. Congressman Eugene Vindman of the House Armed Services Committee is going to join us. Be sure to follow us on social media at Weeknight MS Now. All In with Chris Hayes starts right now.
Tonight on All In.
Somebody asked me a question about the second strike. I didn't know about the second strike. I didn't know anything about people. I wasn't involved.
President Trump says, ask Pete.
So you didn't see any survivors, to be clear, after that first strike?
I did not personally see survivors, but I stand, because the thing was on fire. This is called the fog of war.
Tonight, Senator Mark Kelly on the growing calls for investigation as the boat strike scandal transcends politics.
This is an act of a war crime, ordering survivors who the law requires be rescued instead to be murdered.
Then the polls are closed in Tennessee.
No rational person believes this district should be competitive. Republicans have already lost.
Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries on tonight's big election, the Hegseth scandal, and the Dem push to save health care. And after a wild night of social media posting, Donald Trump's sleeper issue of 2025.
He has an ability to fall asleep while on camera.
But All In starts right now. Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. The polls have now closed in Tennessee in a special election to fill an open seat in Congress. It's a race everyone's watching for clues about the national mood because it is a deep southern district that went for Donald Trump by 22 points last year. Yet this vote comes a month after that brutal election day for Republicans, and they've been struggling ever since. Republicans have sent the vice president down to the district, Tennessee 7, to campaign. They sent the Speaker of the House, along with the president himself calling in on a speakerphone with Mike Johnson held up the microphone. They have spent millions of dollars in campaign funds. All this because Republicans are not entirely certain at this moment that they can hold a plus 22 Trump seat. So we're going to have the latest from Tennessee as more of those results roll in. It's an incredible place to be for an administration that has spent its first year trying to unshackle themselves from any legal, political, or moral restraints, projecting this air of invincibility. That project is now looking like way less of a sure bet, wouldn't you say? I mean, look at the big story out of Washington today, where Donald Trump's administration is embroiled in a genuine scandal and kind of fighting for their lives. They are facing questions about their military campaign to blow up small boats and the people on them in international waters in the guise of an undeclared drug war. Strikes that have now killed more than 80 people so far. Many of these questions culminated after an unbelievably upsetting new Washington Post report about the very first of those boat strikes back in September. Two people familiar say Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth gave a direct order to kill everybody on that boat. But after the first missile strike, 2 survivors were seen clinging to the wreckage. Quote, the Special Operations Commander overseeing that attack in September reportedly ordered a second strike to comply with Hegseth's instructions, and the 2 men were blown apart in the water. Hegseth has told Trump he never gave the order to kill everyone, but he has essentially confirmed how the attack went down. Do you remember the controversy last week over that video of House and Senate Democrats telling members of the military intelligence communities not to obey clearly illegal orders? Trump responded to that video, calling those members traitors, suggesting they were worthy of execution, reposting people saying they had to be hanged. They got death threats, predictably. One of them, of course, was Arizona Senator Mark Kelly, a retired Navy captain, who is now under some formal investigation by Hegseth's Pentagon. And at every step along the way, Republicans said, illegal orders? What do you mean illegal orders? Well, here's one. Killing survivors of a naval attack who are clinging to their life in the water, even in a war, is a crime. You know how I know that? Well, because it is literally in the Pentagon's Manual on the Laws of War, under the heading, Clearly Illegal Orders to Commit Law of War Violations. Quote, the requirement to refuse to comply with orders to commit law of war violations applies to orders to perform conduct that is clearly illegal or orders the subordinate knows in fact are illegal. And then they come up with an example. For example, what's an example that's the most obvious to use? For example, orders to fire upon the shipwrecked would be clearly illegal. Now, it's not a weird coincidence this type of killing is explicitly mentioned in the manual. It is the quintessential war crime. Literally, take no prisoners. War crimes codes exist to prevent and punish the killing of defenseless people. But that is exactly what Trump and Hegseth were promising the American people before this reporting.
We also don't fight with stupid rules of engagement. We untie the hands of our warfighters to intimidate, demoralize, hunt, and kill the enemies of our country. No more politically correct and overbearing rules of engagement. Just common sense, maximum lethality, and authority for warfighters.
I don't think we're going to necessarily ask for a declaration of war. I think we're just going to kill people that are bringing drugs into our country. Okay? We're going to kill them. You know, they're going to be like dead.
But after the first strike on the 2 defenseless men in the water, the DoD stopped killing survivors of its strikes, as far as we can tell. In fact, we know reporting that some have been returned to their homes in Ecuador and Colombia after they survived strikes. It's almost as if the administration knew killing them was illegal and had to stop. And since this new reporting, they have been circling the wagons and trading on their bravado and ignorance. The president put it on his Secretary of Defense.
As far as the attack is concerned, I still haven't gotten a lot of information because I rely on Pete. But to me, it was an attack. It wasn't 1 strike, 2 strikes, 3 strikes. Somebody asked me a question about the second strike. I didn't know about the second strike. I didn't know anything about people. I wasn't involved. And I knew they took out a boat.
I wasn't involved, right? So Commander-in-Chief, unified executive, all-powerful when he wants to be, but when something goes wrong, I don't know. So, okay, let's go down the chain of command. Back in September, Pete Hegseth boasted of watching the strike live as it happened. Live as it happened. He said, I watched it. What does he say now?
I watched that first strike live. As you can imagine, at the Department of War, we got a lot of things to do. So I didn't stick around for the hour and 2 hours, whatever, where all the sensitive site exploitation digitally occurs. So I moved on to my next meeting. A couple of hours later, I learned that that commander had made which he had the complete authority to do, and by the way, Admiral Bradley made the correct decision to ultimately sink the boat and eliminate the threat.
Who is Admiral Bradley who made this decision? That's Frank Bradley, the head of the U.S. Special Operations Command. He reportedly gave the order to strike the men in the wreckage to comply with Hegseth's initial order to kill everyone. Everyone from Trump to Hegseth to White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt has singled Bradley out as the man who gave the order. So much so that, according to the Post, officials in Congress and the Pentagon are increasingly concerned the Trump administration attempts to scapegoat Bradley, the military officer who directed U.S. forces to kill those 2 survivors. Let's be clear about this. If Bradley commanded his sailors to kill those 2 men, he should be held responsible, even if he was following Hegseth orders. But he should not be the sole scapegoat for doing exactly what Hegseth wanted. The secretary looks like he bears criminal responsibility here. And you don't have to take this primetime cable host's word for it. Just ask Judge Andrew Napolitano, the conservative Republican legal analyst.
It gives me no pleasure to say what I'm about to say because I worked with Pete Hegseth for 7 or 8 years at Fox News. This is an act of a war crime, ordering survivors who the law requires be rescued instead to be murdered. There's absolutely no legal basis for it. Everybody along the line who did it, from the Secretary of Defense to the Admiral to the people who actually pulled the trigger, should be prosecuted for a war crime for killing these 2 people.
Now, even many Republicans in Congress, including Senators Tom Tillis, Rand Paul, Roger Wicker, Mike Rounds, are joining their Democratic counterparts in calling for hearings and investigations into possible war crimes committed by and for the Trump administration. Senator Mark Kelly, Democrat of Arizona, who appeared in that video telling troops not to follow illegal orders, joins me now. Senator, first I want to get your sense do you have a clear sense or a clear story from the Pentagon about what happened here, or do you need to know more?
Oh, we need to know a lot more, Chris, and thank you for having me on. I went back and listened to some of the tape where I was asking some questions in the secure facility about those strikes. And there was, a lot of holes, and they could not give us a lot of information, and I felt they were being rather evasive. And it was not a compelling brief. So there needs to be an investigation. But I also want to comment on some of the video you showed of President Trump and Pete Hegseth. I mean, this is not leadership. We've never seen presidents, secretaries of defense that have acted in this way. The president is blaming Pete Hegseth. Pete Hegseth is blaming the admiral. Hegseth is basically turned around and doing the 100-yard dash in the opposite direction. This is exactly not the kind of leaders you ever want running any organization.
Yeah, I want to read for you. I mean, this caught a lot of people's attention in the last few days when, as this story was developing, Pete Hegseth posts on X, let's make one thing crystal clear. Admiral Mitch Bradley is an American hero, a true professional. He has my 100% support. I stand by him in the combat decisions he has made on the September 2nd mission and all others since. America is fortunate to have such men protecting us when this department, so we have says we have the backs of our warriors, we mean it. A lot of people interpreted this as a very obvious attempt to pin this entirely on the admiral.
100%. But is anybody surprised by this guy? I mean, this is the most unqualified Secretary of Defense we've ever had in the history of our country by far. I mean, he runs around on a stage talking about lethality and hunting and killing people. He's working for a president that says, hey, we're just going to, we're going to go out and kill people. This is kind of the environment that these folks have created at the Department of Defense, and it has serious, serious consequences. Now, there needs to be an investigation. I don't want to prejudge anything, but we need to get the facts. We need to see the video. And we need to call Pete Hegseth, certainly in front of the committee and ask him, some serious questions about his leadership, the orders he gave, the environment that he has created in the department.
Roger Wicker, the Republican senator from Mississippi, is the chair of the Armed Services Committee. Senator Reed from Rhode Island is the Democratic ranking member. And it was striking. They put out a statement saying, we want an investigation here. And I've talked to some people about, is this real or not? Like, are we actually going to see genuine oversight and investigation from Senate Republicans on this? You're much closer to them than I am. Do you have confidence this is real?
Well, I have confidence in the chairman of the Armed Services Committee that he's going to try. But are we really going to get transparency from a Department of Defense that has fired inspectors general and JAG officers, the lawyers? They're not looking for transparency. I think they're going to do everything they possibly can to make sure that the real story doesn't get out. But I will say this, there's video. And that video, should be shared. They shared the first part of it with the American people. There's also a legal analysis that I think needs to be made public as well, which is, it's got a lot of holes in it, a lot of circular logic on why this entire operation has been, conducted. And I still have a lot of questions about it.
Yeah, let's stay on that for a second, because I think there's some senses in which it's been my view just watching this. It seemed to me that the legal predicate or rationale for these strikes is incredibly thin and amounts to essentially killing civilians using wartime powers and authorities that are undeclared, unsought from Congress, and not publicly argued for. Now, in this case, the killing of 2 survivors is so clearly something that's, out past what's legally allowable. It seems to have captured people's attention. But do you think we should be having oversight of the entire operation as well, even if they are, they are drug runners or they are smuggling drugs or whatever is being alleged here?
Well, yeah, we don't want drugs coming into our country, but this appears to me, and I think many others, to be a law enforcement problem. And we have to do a better job interdicting, these drugs coming into the country. A lot of this stuff goes to Caribbean islands first. Some of it goes on to Europe. Some of it goes into Mexico and through the southern border. But this is a job for the Coast Guard or sometimes a joint operation with the Navy. But Coast Guard does the law enforcement, operation here. And, they have taken our country, in a direction that now we have members of the United States military that have been put in an impossible situation because they're given, in the case of what we've seen here over the last couple of days, clearly unlawful, illegal orders. And there's tremendous pressure on them. And that was the point, of our video, is just to remind, members of the military that they have an obligation to follow the law. It wasn't specific to this case, but when you consider who this Secretary of Defense is and who this president is, we felt it was a very important message to get to our warfighters.
There was a very strange moment today in which the president was having a cabinet meeting where Pete Hegseth was sort of once again kind of reiterating his distance from the ultimate decision on the second strike. And at the same time, or roughly contemporaneously, there was a press conference at the Pentagon who, they've basically kicked all the traditional, let's say, reporters out because they wouldn't sign this somewhat ludicrous agreement to basically allow the Pentagon to vet. So it's now filled with a very strange group of characters. And your name came up. There were some questions about the investigation. I just want to play you a little bit and get your response. Take a listen.
Okay.
If Secretary Phelan were to recommend court-martial, that could be an option on the table?
All options are on the table at this moment in time, and we look forward to getting the Secretary of the Navy's review. And the Secretary of War has been very clear in his statements as well that he takes this extremely seriously, and it is unacceptable.
What is your response to that?
I haven't even been notified by the Navy. The only notification I've received of any investigation under the Uniform Code of Military Justice for basically saying what's in the Uniform Code of Military Justice, that's how ridiculous this is. But the only notification I've received is a tweet from Pete Hegseth. And that says everything you need to know about our Secretary of Defense, that he cares a lot about his Twitter account, how many views, who's following him on Twitter. That's the only notification I've received. These are not serious people. I can't imagine the Secretary of Defense, if he wants to come across as somebody who, or the Secretary of the Navy, if he wants to come across as a professional, that he'll pursue this because it's so patently ridiculous. But I'll tell you what, Chris, doesn't matter to me what they decide to do. It really doesn't, because I'm not backing down. I'm not being intimidated, because this isn't really about me. It's not about those other 5 people. It's about the President of the United States and his desire to intimidate people, service members, retired members of the military, government employees, American citizens. He didn't like what I said, and because of that, he wanted me killed. And now he wants me court-martialed. And he's going to force his Secretary of Defense to try to do it. They know where to find me.
Senator Mark Kelly of Arizona, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you.
Coming up, as Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth try to pass the blame for what appear to be extrajudicial killings, the bipartisan effort to possibly hold them accountable. Next.
We've only just begun striking narco boats and putting narco terrorists at the bottom of the ocean because they've been poisoning the American people. And President Trump said, no, we're taking the gloves off. We're taking the fight to these designated terror organizations, and it's exactly what we're doing.
Donald Trump and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth are boasting about their boat strikes off the coast of Venezuela, with remarks like those from Hegseth, as well as this meme involving a character from a children's book. But they're also at the same time completely dissembling over allegations they violated the laws of war, specifically as it relates to that very first boat they struck twice, killing 2 survivors of the first strike. Trying to have it both ways, bragging about how they're going after so-called narco-terrorists, also denying they did anything wrong and pointing fingers over who actually ordered the strikes in the first place. Spencer Ackerman is the publisher of the indispensable Forever Wars newsletter, also author of the equally indispensable Reign of Terror, How the 9/11 Era Destabilized America and Produced Trump, and he joins me now. It's good to have you here. Let's talk first about, I've had you on the program to talk about these strikes before. It's something we've covered in depth and you've been writing a lot about. And I've had some sense for much of it of like, I can't believe this is happening. This is so wildly illegal and messed up. What is it about the latest developments that seem to kind of kick this into a new gear, produced bipartisan concern, all that stuff?
So it's a bit of a double-edged sword. What kicked it into full gear is that this latest revelation is that they conducted a double-tap strike on this boat, and once they had firm visual identification that there were survivors, they killed the survivors. That's a really bright line, unambiguous war crime. The double-edged sword part of it is that it risks obscuring what, you had me on the show 3 months ago when these strikes started, and I said right then, this is murder on the high seas. Yeah. Just because the double tap is so egregious, we shouldn't allow ourselves to essentially normalize these strikes that have killed 82, 83 people.
And I think, there's 2 ways I think this could go, right? One, this gets cordoned off as like, this was the line. The other is that we start to actually have oversight of the entire operation. And on the entire operation, I mean, the just manifest pretextual nature of it.
Absolutely.
The inventiveness. And so if anyone thought, well, they really want to go after drugs, then amidst this, in the middle of the scandal, the president announces that he's pardoning Juan Orlando Hernandez, the former Honduran president, convicted in a trial on the federal government of drug trafficking, of saying he's going to shove the drugs up the gringo's nose, of taking $1 million bribe from El Chapo. I mean, this was like a very serious, long case to build. In the midst of it, the guy who was basically running essentially a narco state gets bailed out by Trump with a pardon, released today from West Virginia, while they're saying that this is they have a casus belli for war in Venezuela.
Right. Well, as everyone knows, right-wing cocaine is good for you. It's very clear to anyone even remotely paying attention that this isn't about drugs at all. They tried to overthrow Maduro in the first Trump administration. They had a failed coup there. That's what they're trying to do here. It so happens that the country Maduro rules over is sitting atop the greatest oil reserves in the world. This is pretextually.
Sometimes they say that, yeah.
It is. Sometimes they do.
Yeah.
Sometimes their supporters say it pretty plainly. Sometimes those who advocate for this war, as we saw also when this happened a generation ago with Iraq, occasionally, the real reason kind of pokes its head in here. They're trying to start a war with Venezuela. They will settle for a coup, overthrowing Maduro, and then having American oil companies go in and exploit the oil wealth there.
The note about cocaine also strikes me as relevant here, because again, in the beginning there was this thing they were doing that this was about fentanyl, and like, you know, there is a lot of fentanyl that comes to the U.S. The fentanyl is incredibly deadly. The spike we've seen in overdoses has been horrific. It's, I mean, truly the numbers are just like head snapping. And then people started to point out, like, wait a second, that's not the route for fentanyl. It's not going to Trinidad and Tobago on some little boat. Now it's, I guess, about cocaine. But again, like, anytime you poke at any of this, you can't make any sense of it.
You can make sense of it in terms of understanding this as simply pretextual aggression. There is an agenda under, you know, there's an agenda unfolding here. It has nothing to do with protecting the American people from drugs. What is it now? 40 years of drug war has shown that this is just simply not how you address the scourge of drugs in the United States, and it's not going to do anything for the appetite of drugs in the United States. These are different problems. What's happening instead is that the United States military is engaged in essentially 3 months of murder operations. One of two things will happen. Either that will stop, that will be stopped through political will and then actual criminal penalty, or this will be normalized. And this will happen again and again under ever more absurd pretexts until it happens here in the United States. And you will start seeing lethal military action on American soil against American citizens.
I mean, and people have pointed out this logic, which, again, in your excellent book, when you talk about the war on terror, I mean, it's not an accident they're using narco-terrorist, right? This is a kind of get-out-of-jail-free card. And if they're terrorists, then we can do whatever where we want. Now on the high seas, who knows later on. In terms of Admiral Bradley, when you talk about, you know, how this will happen, I mean, I think everyone with any sense read that tweet from Pete Hegseth and was like, Admiral, call your lawyer. Because the degree to which they are so clearly going to try to pin it solely on him could not be more obvious at this
Absolutely. Point. This is Hegseth's order. This is Trump's directive. Bradley wouldn't have done this on his own. However, we have to understand that the commander of the Joint Special Operations Command unambiguously committed a war crime. If anything, even in the neighborhood of what the Washington Post reported, Bradley enthusiastically agreed to this. We are past a point of moral rot within the military, and frankly, within the special operations community in particular, because of how often throughout administrations, Democratic and Republican, in the war on terror, the special operations community was ordered to do precisely these sorts of missions. And you can clearly see this from the exact type of mission that this was. This was a double-tap drone strike. We've seen that again and again for 20 years, normalized. It is only accordingly a small jump after that to start doing this against civilian boats in the middle of waters off Venezuela.
Final question for you. The one shoe not to drop yet so far for me is Admiral Halsey, who is the commander of the Southern Command. Word came out that he was leaving. This was, and it seemed very clear just from the calendar, this had to have something to do with these strikes, which had been under Southern Command. The commander here was Special Operations, which I also thought was pretty notable.
Yes, different chains of command.
Different chains of command.
Would not have been in control.
Exactly. It seems to me that Halsey, we're going to have to hear from Admiral Halsey at some point.
Halsey's last day at Southcom is a week from Friday. He is the most important witness that this congressional investigation could call and that potential criminal investigations could call. Halsey would have been in the room as this happened. He would not necessarily have been in the chain, as we've apparently seen with this. But his voice and what he witnessed is crucial evidence going forward.
Spencer Ackerman, great to have you. Thank you. Still ahead, we're getting our first results in Tennessee, and Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries will be with me on the plan to take back the House. That's next. All right, so we're starting to get some results in that special election in the 7th district in Tennessee. Now, that's a district that Donald Trump won by 22 points just last year. It is the deepest of red districts. It should be a cakewalk. You'll see now that Afton Bain right now is leading Matt Van Epps. That's the Democrat there on the left, Afton Bain, leading Matt Van Epps. Now, we should note there's 37.5% in. And we just got a big vote dump from that blue panel you see up there at the top of the district, and that would be Davidson County. Davidson County, which is the most Democratic part of this district. It's a district sort of designed to be a Republican district. Take a bunch of votes from the Democratic voters around Nashville, which is Davidson, and sort of dilute them through the other counties around them, which are deep red. We have just gotten that. You see that dark blue Nashville. We've just gotten some of those votes in. This is all very, 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 very early, 37.5% in. It's going to come down a lot to what happens in Davidson, particularly in the Nashville area, and lower turnout, frankly, in some of the more exurban and rural areas in the district. But as you can see, at this point in the evening, 35 minutes after poll closing, you have a race that is not called yet and is competitive in a district that's Trump plus 22, which says something about where things stand right now politically. And joining me now is House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries of New York. Obviously, Congressman, it's too early to say anything definitively, but what do you think about the run-up to this race, given the intensely unfavorable terrain it's being contested on for the Democratic Party, and the amount of resources that the Republican Party put into it?
Well, good evening, Chris. Great to be with you. And I think intensely unfavorable terrain would be a very generous description of the hostility that the Democratic candidate faces deep in Trump country, in the heart of Tennessee, right? A very red part of America, with Republicans, as you've pointed out, having spent millions of dollars to hold on to a seat that Donald Trump just won by 22 points. So the fact that this is even a close race, potentially a single-digit race, whatever the outcome, in and of itself is extraordinary and reinforces the point that Republicans are on the run because they've been complete and total failures, and the American people know it. And Democrats are continuing to lean in to the fact that we want to solve real problems for the American people, drive down the high cost of living, deal with the affordability crisis, and certainly fix our broken healthcare system.
I want to ask you about the healthcare system, but since you mentioned affordability, I want to play you what the president said about the word affordability, that it's a scam, I guess, concocted by Democrats. Take a listen.
There's this fake narrative that the Democrats talk about, affordability. They just say the word. It doesn't mean anything to anybody. They just say it. The word affordability is a Democrat scam.
I imagine you disagree, but what do you mean by that word when you say it?
Well, listen, Donald Trump's whole life is a scam. The Trump administration is a scam. And certainly the so-called House Republican majority is a scam. These people promised that they were going to lower costs on day one, right? They provided the measuring stick. They made that promise to the American people. And of course, costs aren't going down, costs are going up. The Trump tariffs are creating a crisis in affordability. Thousands of dollars in additional expense for everyday Americans in terms of goods and groceries. We know that housing costs are through the roof, electricity bills are skyrocketing, and now, because of the Republican refusal to extend the Affordable Care Act tax credits, tens of millions of Americans are about to experience dramatically increased health care costs. And what does that mean? In some cases, $1,000 or $2,000 per month. And as you know, Chris, these are working class Americans. The average income around $63,000 per year. This will make health care unaffordable. People will be unable to see a doctor when they need one.
There was some discussion about after the shutdown resolved, would there be some path forward on extending those subsidies? There's, I think, about 12 Republican members who are going to be in very competitive districts who all right now are looking at these results in Tennessee. I guarantee you they have them up on their phone and they're looking at them right now, talking about, well, we need to. They wrote a letter to Mike Johnson. We got to extend them. You see there, that's the latest there. Afton Bain up by 8 points with 41% in. We're going to keep our eyes on that. That seems to have petered now. Like, what is the status of that? Is there any motion on the House side, at least, to extend these subsidies?
Well, on the House side, of course, House Democrats have introduced a discharge petition. We now have 213 signatures, which basically means we just need a handful of these House Republicans, these so-called moderate Republicans, who spent months claiming that as soon as the Trump shutdown ended, they were prepared to work together with us to extend the Affordable Care Act tax credits, but we've heard nothing from them over the last several weeks. And it appears that they just talked to talk, but are unwilling to walk the walk. We're going to continue to keep the pressure on them because the clock is ticking, and it's a very real crisis that the American people are going to face. And as you know, the majority of states that will be most adversely impacted are Republican-run states. We're talking about states like West Virginia, Wyoming, Alaska, Mississippi, and Tennessee, it turns out, that will be impacted if Republicans refuse to extend the Affordable Care Act tax credits. And so, you know, we'll see some action potentially in the Senate next week. We're going to continue to press the case to force an up or down vote on a straight 3-year extension in the House. And we're in this fight until we win this fight on behalf of the American people.
I want to ask you about the story we were covering in the earlier blocks, the reporting about that second strike on the survivors of an initial strike of a boat in the Caribbean. What do you want to see? The Senate has talked about conducting oversight, including Roger Wicker, who's the chair of Armed Services there. There's been a few Republican House members who've expressed their misgivings or concerns. What do you think should be happening in the House?
Well, Chairman Mike Rogers of the Armed Services Committee in the House has jointly indicated with Adam Smith, the once and future chairman of the Armed Services Committee on the Democratic side, that there will be an investigation into potential illegality as it relates to the strikes that were ordered that clearly the so-called Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, the most unqualified Secretary of Defense in American history, had knowledge of and was a part of. And that investigation is going to reveal some interesting things. It's clear that Donald Trump and Hegseth are trying to throw the admiral under the bus. And, you know, we're not going to allow them to get away from that. It's a cowardly act, and we're going to follow this investigation as far as it needs to go. And hopefully our Republican colleagues won't continue to behave like, you know, sycophants, and will start acting like a separate and co-equal branch of government to serve as a check and balance on an out-of-control Secretary of Defense and an out-of-control executive branch.
Do you agree with those who have said if the facts as reported, and it seems to me now basically uncontested, about that second strike are true, it is a war crime?
Yeah, if the facts appear to be as has been presented, I think there's no doubt that it's a war crime. It's a violation of U.S. law and a violation of international law at the same time, and there's got to be serious consequences for all involved.
House Democratic Leader Hakeem Jeffries, thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you.
Still to come as Donald Trump's cabinet members trip over themselves to lavish him with praise. Why was the president having such a hard time keeping his eyes open? Next. We're continuing to follow the returns from that special election in the 7th District of Tennessee, where Democrat Afton Bain is now leading the Republican candidate Matt Van Epps. Now, I want to caution here, we've got 43% of the vote in, more or less. There's still a lot of vote outstanding, particularly in areas. Most of the district is incredibly Republican. There is one county in the district that is Democratic. That's Davidson County, where Nashville is. Bain will have to massively overperform there in order to manage to sort of pull this out. It's unclear whether those are the numbers she has so far, but as you can see, she's up by 4 points now, still more than half the vote out. It is not, I guess what you could say at this point, a cakewalk, an obvious, enormous victory for Matt Van Epps. The fact that Bain is even in this at this point is going to send chills up the spines of I think probably dozens of Republican incumbents who are in districts that are way, way, way harder to defend than the 7th District of Tennessee. So we're going to keep watching that. Meanwhile, today, Donald, and I want to bring in Claire McCaskill and Corbin Trent. Claire McCaskill, of course, who served at Senator Missouri. Corbin Trent, who was a Democratic operative from Tennessee. He was also one of the original spokespeople for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Corbin, as a native Tennessean, let me ask you what you think of what we're seeing out of the election so far.
You know, if something like this could happen in Tennessee, it can happen all across the country. I mean, for me, you know, single digits was going to be a huge win. If she closed the gap from 22 to single digits, that tells you that it's a different playing field out there for Democrats across this country in 2026. And if she closes it to 5, I mean, you know, I think that is even more massive, obviously. I mean, if she does like an AOC and pulls off the unwinnable, then I think that really sends a message not only about what Democrats are capable of across the country, but then also what progressive Democrats are capable of. That's, I think, going to be the real lesson to learn from this here. This was not a Abigail Spanberger, middle of the road. This is not a Joe Manchin's the only one that can win West Virginia. This is an actual, old school Tennessee Democrat, from back in my grandpa. This is like a Democrat like my papa would tell me about. I would love to see that Democratic Party be reborn, the one that I grew up hearing about and being proud of. It'd be great.
Claire, you were there in the Senate, I think, when Scott Brown won that special for Ted Kennedy's own seat. And I remember being in Washington the day and just, I mean, now, obviously that was an actual victory. It wasn't just, well, we've narrowed the margin. But just professional politicians are going to look at these returns and they're going to index them against their own district to what Corbin was saying about what does the national environment look like and what does my district look like and what does that mean for my future, right?
Oh, no question about it. And I'll tell you what keeps running through my mind is their whole redistricting strategy. Keep in mind, their whole redistricting strategy was they were going to do to every state what they did in Tennessee, and that's right. They split Nashville up, the major blue area of Tennessee. They split it in 3 districts and just swarmed it with rural red districts. That's what they've done. They've tried to do all over the country. So in a lot of the ones they've drawn, it's Trump plus 10, Trump plus 11. So I'll tell you who's really worried right now are the people who have been redrawn into districts where they've had to give up 5 or 6 performance points in order to grab another district for the Republicans in places like Texas. This whole redistricting thing is blowing up in their faces. And I've looked at all the data. I think she's going to come way closer than any Democrat has a right to there. But I do think it says a whole lot about Donald Trump right now. It says a whole lot about his failure. And hats off to the Democrats for some messaging discipline on health care costs.
Yeah, Corbin, let me ask you this. We've seen the beginnings of Republicans kind of turning against Trump a little bit. It happened with Epstein, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's in Georgia announcing that she's going to be leaving abruptly. We're seeing a little bit of signaling happening from Republicans on the boat strikes in the Senate and the House. How important do you think it is to the sort of political perceptions if Trump is actually getting criticism from within validated voices that people might be listening to in a district like Tennessee 7?
I mean, if it's coming from within inside MAGA, right? So obviously Marjorie Taylor Greene was that, then I think it definitely breaks through more than if it's coming from, what people would dismiss as the Republican sort of, uniparty, right? So there was a very much an anti-establishment current running through MAGA. And it made sort of Donald Trump invincible to criticism from the Jeb Bushes and those sort of old school voices of the Republican Party. And I think if you start seeing more and more of the people that he brought along and uplifted and the voices that he raised turning on him, or at least even criticizing him slightly, then yeah, it's definitely going to make a difference. But I think what's making a difference is people assumed that jobs would start coming back. They assumed that prices would go down. They this to me is the same thing that people asked for when they voted for Obama. It's the same thing they asked for when they voted for Bernie Sanders in the primaries. I think the American people have been asking for a very, very long time to please make our lives more livable, please make our country more affordable, more equitable, and hold people accountable. And the problem is that each time they keep getting hoodooed. Now, this time they got hoodooed by Trump. We've been hoodooed by Democrats, too.
Claire, do you think this sort of laser focus on healthcare and on affordability, do you think that ends up being the kind of key consistent theme through the year here? As you start seeing candidates run in these primaries, there's going to be a lot of contested primaries and in these seats.
Yeah, here's the thing. The one thing Trump can't do is he can't tell people that they're not hurting, that it's a hoax. The idea that he sits in that cabinet room and says affordability is a hoax. Folks who are trying to make it come out even at the end of the month, folks that are scrambling to try to see if they can afford their rent or their medicine or even put food on the table, they know that it is a problem. They know they're on the short end of the stick. And Trump can't do anything with his lying to change how they feel. That's why this issue is going to be so powerful next year. That's why Democrats are going to have the advantage.
Before we go, I just want to note that you will see that Matt Van Epps has moved ahead with 55% of the vote reported. Just so people understand the dynamics here, basically any vote that's coming in from any county that's not Davidson or maybe Montgomery is going to benefit Epps. We've had one big vote dump from Davidson. There's still a lot of vote out in Davidson, which is the natural area. So it's going to be this sort of back and forth between any vote coming in getting reported from those other counties there that you see in red. They're going to increase Van Epps' vote totals relatively. When we get the next big Davidson vote dump, that will give us a clearer sense of when things stand. Corbin Trent, Claire McCaskill, thanks so much for joining me. We'll be right back.
Thanks for having me.
We're going to have lots more coverage at MS Now for updates on this Tennessee special election. That's all in for this Tuesday night. The briefing with Jen Psaki starts right now. Good evening, Jen.
Chris, it's election night in America again.
It sure is, once again.
We are waiting. We're actually waiting. We're going to have Afton Bain on in just a moment, who the polls are closing, and she is doing surprisingly well. I mean, she has no business doing as well as she is doing in this district. Hasn't been called yet. We're watching it closely. But, yeah, what do you make of this race? What does it tell us?
I think, the benchmark that I was seeing, it's a plus 22 race. People saying single digits. I mean, anything that's in the neighborhood of a 14, 15-point swing from baseline. I mean, there's probably 3 or 4 dozen incumbent seats that are in that category, right? in the House. So, it's, again, special elections are weird, they're wonky, but, there's obviously something happening. And we saw it a month ago, and we're seeing it tonight.
No question. I mean, many, many moons ago, I worked at the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee many years ago. Rahm Emanuel was the chair, just to give you a sense. So this is a long time ago.
It's big cycle.
And that year, and we've got a long way to go from there, there were people who won on election night that we had never really spoken to as a party committee, and that's what can happen. Again, we've got a long time to go till the election, but when there's a big movement, a big wave, a lot of anger from the country about who's the president, about the leadership of the party in charge, people can be brought across the finish line, good candidates or candidates who have no business winning in certain districts. It's going to be like a really interesting race to watch. And she's also talked about a lot of things. I mean, she talked about certainly cost of living, affordability. She had a very Bernie Sanders-like message on calling out billionaires. But she also talked about the Epstein files, which is kind of interesting because that hasn't been a big issue in races really around the country.
Yeah, and Corbin, the last guest was saying, I mean, she's an interesting candidate for that district too, right? She's not, because it was a special and because she was sort of a little bit of a known quality there, she won a primary, not the kind of candidate that like the Rahm Emanuel D-Trip would have recruited to run in this race, and still performing more than respectably this evening.
No question. We're going to watch it really, really closely, and we'll probably talk about it tomorrow, no matter what happens, because she's doing way better than anyone expected. Have a good night, Chris.
You too.
Okay, we're watching what could end up being a political earthquake tonight. We'll see. I mean, it's been 1 hour since polls closed in the special congressional election in Tennessee, and the entire political world is watching all of these results like a hawk tonight. We certainly are. And as of now, that race is too early to call. With about half the vote in, this is a very, very tight race, just over half the vote in. And here's the thing I really need to underline. Chris just mentioned this, but it's important to keep underlining. Trump won the district, Tennessee 7, by 22 points just last year. 22 points. A Democrat has absolutely no business winning here, even a great candidate. And a bunch of national Republican groups have had to spend a boatload of money that they really shouldn't have to spend in such a deep red district. Money is not unlimited in political campaigns or in national party committees, and they're spending a lot here, and so are outside super PACs. So if this race is even close, which it's looking to be at a minimum, it will be a big, big, big warning sign for Trump and the Republican Party that their hold on power could be slipping very quickly. One senior House Republican told Politico today that, quote, if our victory margin is single digits, the conference may come unhinged. Well, we'll all look forward to watching that if that's the case. Now, if these early vote numbers are any indication, the conference might indeed come unhinged because they're looking very good right now for Afton Bain. And this is the first election night since those massive Democratic wins in New Jersey and Virginia last month. But even before that, in all 4 special House elections this year, Democrats have dramatically improved their margins over 2024, dramatically, outperforming by between 16 and 22 points. That's held true in red districts and blue districts, in red states and blue states. And tonight, it might just hold true in deep red Tennessee. We'll see. Joining me now is Afton Bain, Democratic nominee in the special election in Tennessee's 7th congressional district. You must be feeling quite amazing right now. But let me just ask, I mean, votes are still rolling in, but the race right now appears to be very, very close. How are you feeling right now?
I'm excited. The momentum has been on our side. We are overperforming in places where we need to be and losing less in other places. And folks are excited on the ground. They're tired of being taken advantage of, and the message of affordability has resonated across political spectrum.
You know your district extremely well. You've been campaigning your heart out over the last several months. I mean, again, I'll just keep saying it. Trump won by 22 points. Where have you seen a kind of surprising surge of support for you across your district? What have you seen that's been would be surprising to people?
Yeah, I think Tennesseans are fed up with the status quo. And as I've said on the campaign trail, if you're upset about the chaos in Washington and the cost of living, then I'm your candidate. And I think this is a moment in time when voters want change rather than the status quo.
You ran this campaign, and you and I talked about this last Wednesday, which feels like a lifetime ago. It may feel like that to you as well, given how hard you campaigned over the weekend. That was largely focused on the cost of living. You had this great ad with a mechanical bull. People should go out there and watch. You also talked about issues like the Epstein files, which have not been issues in political campaigns as much as it's been a big national story. Is there anything in particular, especially over the last couple of days, that you think really resonated the most with residents of Tennessee's 7th congressional district?
Yeah, the privatization of the Tennessee Valley Authority. It is a big issue, especially with rural labor union leaders in the 7th district. And President Trump is imminently trying to privatize it by installing sycophants on the board. And I've made the privatization of TVA a campaign issue. And I've talked about it in the rural communities, and I think it's really resonating with a lot of them.
That's such a good example. All politics is national, sort of. We're about to talk to Ken Martin, but it's also local. And a lot of these issues that a lot of these things Trump is doing are impacting people hugely in their districts. Afton Bain, thank you so much for taking the time. I know it's been a whirlwind of a day. We're going to keep following and covering every detail of this race. Thank you again for making the time.
Thank you so much.
Okay, joining me now is Ken Martin. He's, of course, the chairman of the Democratic National Committee and someone who has worked to make this race as close as it's been. So, Ken, I keep saying this. I mean, Trump won this district by 22 points a year ago. There's a lot of results that are coming in. Afton Bain has been outperforming in early votes. We're seeing places where she's outperforming, of course, on Election Day votes. Talk to us a little bit about how this district became one that Democrats were able to capitalize. Obviously, you have a great candidate there, but tell us more about why and how.
Well, first, let me just give all the thanks to Afton Bain for running in this district, for believing that she could win and getting out there and working for it, and running on the issues that people care about. We've seen, and you mentioned this earlier in your reporting, a huge overperformance since Donald Trump was inaugurated. In every election that's been on the ballot this year in 2025, Democrats have overperformed in red districts, in blue districts, in purple districts, all throughout this country. In fact, last November's elections were the most historic off-year elections for the Democratic Party in our party's history. And we are overperforming at an average pace of about 16 percentage points. And you're seeing that in this district tonight. It's a plus 22% district. The Republicans have spent over $4 million trying to win a district they should have won handedly. And why are we winning this district? Well, first, again, you start with good candidates who are running on messages that people care about. There is a through line. Democrats, we're not very disciplined oftentimes as it relates to messaging, but guess what? This year we have been. We've been laser focused on affordability, on issues that are animating the American public around the kitchen table. Many families right now are struggling, and they've been saying loud and clear in election after election, we're looking for champions, and that's what's happening in Tennessee 7 tonight. You know, I'm not going to take credit for what's happening out there, right? But the reality is the Democratic Party, under my leadership, we said we're going to contest every single race. I was down there campaigning with Afton. We spent considerable resources in the district helping her and her campaign to make sure that they can compete. Because I believe when you organize everywhere, you can win anywhere, and we've seen that throughout this year.
The race is not called yet. Too early to call. Just over 50% of the vote was in when the last time we gave a little bit of an update, and we'll keep updating people throughout the hour. But she may win. She may not win. But even if she doesn't win, if it's a margin that's in the single digits, or what does the margin look like that you think sends a strong message to Republicans out there that they're in trouble?
Well, you reported it just a moment ago. The Republicans are scared. They're nervous. They're shaking in their boots. They know, again, if they perform single digits here, which looks likely, they may win this race. Again, she still has a chance to win this race. There's a lot of votes that haven't been counted here. But even if she doesn't, and she comes in within single digits of a plus 22% district, a district they should have won handedly, that is a huge red flag for Republicans going into the 2026 midterm elections, right? We only need 3 seats to win back the U.S. House. And I want you to think about this. You know this better than anyone, Jen. In 2005, George Bush comes out, he attacks Social Security. His numbers go into the toilet, and guess what? The next year, we have a huge wave election for Democrats. We win both chambers of Congress back. No one thought there was a prayer's chance in hell Democrats are going to win in 2006. This year, Donald Trump comes out. He attacks Medicaid. He attacks SNAP. He attacks Social Security. His tariffs aren't working for the American people. He's hit an all-time low in terms of his popularity. He's going into an election right now where he's been losing. Top to bottom, he's been losing ground with the base that helped get him elected president last year. What we look at is not just wins and losses. We look at the shifts, right? And what we're seeing is a seismic shift that's been happening all year long. Latino voters who supported Donald Trump last year have swung back to us. Young voters, including young men, have swung back to Democrats. Women voters, independent voters are breaking 2-to-1 for Democrats. And the reality is, sure, part of it's our great candidates running on affordability, and part of it is the fact that the American people are disgusted at what they're seeing out of this administration.
I remember the 06 cycle quite well. I was at the DCCC,
Yes,
and it was also a campaign about the culture of corruption, which is also, there's a huge parallel.
That's
to
right.
Maybe it's a worse culture of corruption, I think it's safe to say. Let me ask you about just kind of what this could mean in terms of what the scope of races could look like out there, because money is not unlimited, although, you know, this is exciting, could be exciting to Democrats, even if she doesn't pull off a win. What does this mean in terms of how many House races could be in play? Do you look at a much bigger map of races? How big?
Well, look, I mean, as big as we need to, right? And what I mean by that is we need to win the majority back. You need 3 seats. But what this means for Hakeem Jeffries and Susan DelBene and the DCCC now is that they can expand out the map. They have a lot more opportunities to actually win the majority than the Republicans do to keep the majority, right? And for us right now, when we look at the fact that our overperformance is by 16 percentage points on average, that means any Republican in this country who won their congressional seat by 16 points or less is vulnerable. And guess what? We're coming after them. And we've been coming after them all year long. And as a result, like I said, this overperformance is resulting in us winning in places. And even in those places where we're losing, we are cutting those margins significantly. This portends good things for the Democratic Party. But as I've said to folks, I'm optimistic, I'm confident, but I'm not complacent. And my message to Democrats right now is let's not rest on our laurels right now, right? We have to keep doing the work. We have to get out there and keep organizing. We can win both chambers back next year. I am confident on that. But we are not going to be complacent at the DNC. Even tonight, and again, Afton still has a chance to win this race. Even if she doesn't, we're not going to rest on the fact that we overperformed. It's another proof point for us, and it's another opportunity for us to show people throughout this country that we have the momentum behind us right now. The Democrats have had the wind at their back all year long, and we've taken advantage of that, and we're going to continue to do so.
You're going to have a big board tomorrow with these Republicans who only have margins of 10, 12, 14 points. That's what I'm going to tell people is going to happen. One of the things that's been interesting, maybe surprising about her race, at least to me, is that she's running so close. We'll see what happens tonight. She's run as an unapologetic progressive on a range of issues, including on issues like the impact of ICE and devastation on communities. She has had kind of a Bernie Sanders-like message about, billionaires and trillionaires and the impact on the country. She's not been sliding to the middle or sliding to try to model a moderate. What does that tell you about the kind of candidates that might work in different districts out there?
Well, I've said all along, right? The reality is it takes different types of people in different spaces and places throughout the country to win. And there's no one way or one stripe of being a Democrat, right? But what I would say is what most Americans care about right now is actually putting food on the table, right? They want to save their health care. They want a chance to get ahead and actually build a better life for their family. They're worried about the cost of child care, right? And that's what Afton Bain's been focused on. And while there's all this conversation around progressive or centrist or conservative or, progressive Democrats, at the end of the day, I think what Americans care most about, they don't care about those labels. They don't care about ideology. They want champions. They want someone who's going to stand up, call it for what it is, and then present ideas and solutions on how we're actually going to improve people's lives. Because at the end of the day, that's what they're looking for. Many of those same people who are now voting for Democrats voted for Donald Trump last year, not because of his ideology, but because they wanted a champion. They wanted someone who was going to deliver, and he's abandoned them. All to give tax breaks to the richest people in this country. He's sold working people, many people who voted for him, down the river. And those people are coming back to the Democrats because now we are standing up and we're showing them what's possible with Democrats back in charge. That's what's happening around this country. So I reject this idea of putting labels on this. The reality is the Democratic Party is the party that's fighting for your best economic chance and your future. And the Democratic Party is the party focused on affordability. Just today, Donald Trump said affordability is a hoax. Once again, he said it's a hoax.
We'll talk about it. I asked this question because I think it impacts the kind of candidates people recruit from the national party. And I think that playbook maybe needs to be thrown out because there's different kinds of people who can win than I think the old playbook tells us.
Well, you know what? As you know, I didn't come here to do things the same way. And I've said we have a big tent party. There's many different ways of being a Democrat, and all of them are welcome in this party, as long as they're focused on making sure we make a difference in people's lives. What that looks like in New York City is different than in Virginia and in New Jersey and in Tennessee and in California and in my home state of Minnesota. You need candidates who fit those districts who are going to stand up and fight for people. That's what we're doing.
Ken Martin, I'm looking forward to seeing that bulletin board you have tomorrow. It's got to be a big bulletin board for all the people. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Jen. Yeah.
All right, we have to sneak in a very quick break, but we are keeping a very close eye on the special election in Tennessee tonight. Results are continuing to come in as we speak. You can see that on the screen, about 72.9% reporting, still very tight. And remember, this is a district Donald Trump won by 22 points last year. So even a single-digit loss for the Democratic candidate could have alarm bells going off for Republicans. Congressman Ro Khanna is standing by, and he joins me next. Okay, it's been just over an hour since polls closed in Tennessee's 7th congressional district. This is the special election, of course, between Republican Matt Van Epps and Democrat Afton Benaz. Oh, we have an update here. We have a projected winner in the Tennessee congressional district special election race. You can see it right there on our screen with 75% of reporting in. We are projecting Matt Van Epps is the projected winner. What will be so interesting to watch, though, in this race is what the margin of victory is, because this is a race where outside groups, the Republican National Party, had to spend a huge amount of money to help Matt Van Epps win, money that they should not be spending in a Republican district like this. And we'll see what the final margins are. But if Afton Bain can keep it close, a single-digit margin, we've already heard from House Republicans that that is going to make the House Republican caucus implode, and we've already heard from Ken Martin that he is going to expand the map. So lots to discuss here. Joining me now to discuss all of it is California Democratic Congressman Ro Khanna, who endorsed Afton Bain in this race. Okay, so Congressman, we just called the race from here, but this is a race, and I've been reiterating this, and I was in politics for a long, long time before I came here, that this is a race a Democrat had no business, even a great candidate like Afton Bain, even coming close to winning, given Trump won it by 22 points just a year ago. And Republicans had to spend a huge amount of money. Talk to me a little bit about what you saw happening in this race and what you think, most importantly, it tells us about where the electorate is, given we're 11 months out from the midterm elections.
Well, Afton ran a fabulous campaign. She's a fabulous candidate. The fact that Wasserman had to even make a call in this race says it all. I mean, this was a district that Donald Trump carried by 22 points, and Afton has come within a few points of winning. The deepest red counties in the district are ones that shifted away from the Republican to Afton, and she ran on an unabashedly economically populist agenda. She ran saying that we can't have Medicaid cuts, that we need to be expanding health care, that we need a living wage. It just shows that we can compete everywhere in this country. And I think there are 53 districts that are less red than this one. And if she can do this here, you can imagine the kind of wave we could have to elect Hakeem Jeffries Speaker and take back the House.
Yeah, I saw him in the hallway. He did Chris Hayes' show. He had a little pep in his step, I'm not going to lie. So during her campaign, I thought this messaging was really interesting, because now is the period of time where Democrats who are in competitive races or challengers are really thinking about what they should be talking about. No question, affordability is at the center of it. But she did something interesting. She tied the Epstein files with the cost of living. I mean, her perspective seemed to be that the current fight is one between the billionaire and the working class, which I think it very much is. You talk about both of these issues. What did you make of her messaging and her kind of tying the two together?
I think it was spot on. We did a town hall together where she talked about this. I've taken to calling it an Epstein class, and by that I just mean rich and powerful people who feel the rules don't apply to them and they can get away with doing things that without considering the consequences for everyone else. Look, you have a situation in my district, Silicon Valley. Billionaires' wealth has gone up from $3 trillion to $8 trillion, $18 trillion of value, and 70% of people don't believe in the American dream, and people are tired of it. They want an economy that works for everyone. And that was Afton's message. I believe that can be the message in almost every district. Trump has lost his populism. I mean, he didn't win the presidency twice hanging out with tech billionaires and building ballrooms. And he's just lost touch with actually the populism he ran on.
Again, just in case you're joining us here, NBC News, the NBC News Decision Desk projects that Matt Van Epps is going to win the 7th congressional district in Tennessee, the special election. It's a very, very close margin. We'll see what the final margin is when the final results are tallied. Let me ask you, do you think, I mean, as you look to next year, one of the things that's interesting, and I was talking to Ken Martin about this a little bit, is that Democrats have been outperforming in these special elections by 15 to 20 points in some places, a little bit less in others. We're 11 months out. I mean, what do you think that tells us about where the electorate is? And what do you think needs to happen between now and then not to lose the momentum on this?
I think they're rejecting Donald Trump. They were appalled that he didn't release the Epstein files. They're appalled that he's spending all his time with billionaires. They're appalled that he didn't bring prices down on day one. They're appalled that he's got a Secretary of Defense who's killing people without any justification on boats. I mean, and they're appalled by ICE raids that are splitting up families and engaged in cruelty. The electorate is moving towards us. One of the important things also is that, Vice President Harris got the same amount of the white vote as President Obama. We ended up losing some of the Latino vote, African American vote, Asian American vote. All of those communities are coming back to us. So you can never be overconfident, Jen, as you know, in politics. But I feel very, very good about a majority. I saw Hakeem Jeffries today. He feels good. He reminded me it's only halftime. We have to keep going. But look, I hope more people will take heart from what Afton did. She did something that very few people have the guts to do. She said, I'm going to run. I'm going to put my life on hold. It's 22 points that I have to overcome, but I'm going to do it. And if we can get more people inspired to run across this country, that's how we get a big wave.
People watching out there, if not you, then who? Now's the time to get involved. Congressman Ro Khanna, thank you, as always, for joining us. We have to sneak in a very quick break. But up next, we're going to turn our attention to one of the greatest military scandals of modern times, with a person who's been talking about it and sounding the alarm about it more than almost anyone else, if not more than anybody else. Senator Mark Warner is the ranking Democrat on the Senate Intelligence Committee, and he joins me next. Okay, we just want to keep you updated on this race out of Tennessee, where, according to the NBC News decision desk, the Republican candidate is projected to win, but where the Democratic candidate is massively overperforming in a district Donald Trump won by 22 points. And that is just one thing, just one of the things the Trump administration does not want to be talking about right now. Maybe we'll get a late night crazy sprint of posts tonight. We'll see. I mean, despite all of the administration's efforts to shut down access and reporting by the free press, the Washington Post still got this scoop late last week about the first of the U.S. strikes in the Caribbean and the Pacific that have now killed more than 80 people. They report that Hegseth gave a spoken directive in that September 2nd strike. According to one of two people with direct knowledge of the operation, the order was to kill everybody. Now, that on its own is very likely illegal, according to experts. But after that first strike, as commanders watched a boat burning on a live drone feed, they saw that two survivors were clinging to the smoldering wreck. So the commander overseeing the operation ordered a second strike to comply with Hegseth's instructions. The two men were blown apart in the water. Now, I should note that MS Now has not independently confirmed that report. But to be clear, that second strike, shooting the defenseless and shipwrecked, wouldn't just be a war crime. It is the textbook definition of a war crime. Now, as far as Hegseth himself is concerned and how he is spinning all of this, I guess is one way to describe it, this is what he had to say about that strike the day after it happened back in September.
I can tell you that was definitely not artificial intelligence. I watched it live. We knew exactly who was in that boat. We knew exactly what they were doing, and we knew exactly who they represented.
He watched it live, everyone. He knew exactly who was in the boat and what was happening. He was totally in charge. I mean, that is some serious chest thumping there, Pete Hegseth. You can always tell when he elevates his voice and talks louder. That's the tell. So that was his story then. Here was Hegseth today.
I watched that first strike live. As you can imagine, at the Department of War, we got a lot of things to do. So I didn't stick around for the hour and 2 hours, whatever, where all the sensitive site exploitation digitally occurs. So I moved on to my next meeting. I did not personally see survivors, but I stand, because the thing was on fire. It was exploded and fire or smoke. You can't see anything. You got digital. This is called the fog of war. This is what you in the press don't understand.
I have so many questions. One of them is, what on earth was the meeting he had to go attend instead of watching this? That aside, I mean, did he watch the whole thing live or just the first strike? Did he give a verbal order to kill everybody? And is this an isolated incident or just the first one we happen to know about, which makes me think about Signalgate? And how do we get answers to these questions? I know someone who is working very, very hard on that. The perfect person to ask. Joining me now is Senator Mark Warner of Virginia. He's the ranking Democrat on the Senate Intelligence Committee. You have been sounding the alarm on this for months now.
4 months.
months. You know, and part of what I think is so important to remind people of is what is normal and what is not normal. And that's part of what you've been doing. Today, we didn't show this, we're not going to play it, but Donald Trump was asked about this second strike. And he said he didn't know about it, he wasn't involved with it, and that he relies on Pete. Now, I've worked for two presidents, two commanders-in-chief. I cannot imagine either of them ever saying something like that. You have probably done the congressional oversight on more military actions than almost anybody else. What did you make of that?
This is the biggest crowd of wimps you've ever seen. They pound their chest. Remember when Hegseth brought all the generals and admirals in and lectured them? Best news, frankly, we've seen recently because they stayed true to the Constitution. This guy says he's going to be tough. The first hint that might be a problem, he's now trying to throw the admiral who's in charge of SOCOM under the bus.
Yeah.
This is the worst kind of action. And I'm going to see Admiral Bradley on Thursday. I'm going to ask him.
You're going to meet with him on Thursday?
I'm going to meet with him on Thursday. But the thing is, if everything was okay here, show the whole damn video.
Yeah.
He said he bragged about seeing the whole video. Release the video. Was there one strike? Was there two? Was there three? Were there people still living? Which, as you pointed out, Jen, is against the rules of war. We should not put American soldiers, sailors, in a place where they could be violating international law and become literally liable. That is not the way the American government operates. And unfortunately, we've seen this time and again. From Hegseth, we got the Signalgate, you mentioned Signalgate, when they put literally thousands of sailors, and particularly those who took strikes against Yemen, in harm's way by talking about this before it took place on a non-classified communications mode. This is sloppiness, this is chaos, this does not help America. And this whole effort, if they were actually got the goods on these guys, interdict them, show the world the narco-terrorists, and show them the drugs, as opposed to what Trump has done, which is like, let me go ahead and give another pardon to the former president of Honduras, who has been convicted under American law as being a drug narco-terrorist, and he lets him out of jail because of political opportunism. This is not the way America operates. Well, I hope we're going to talk about the elections in Tennessee and in Virginia, but part of this is beyond affordability, beyond the fact that we got to stand up for health care. It is the fact that most Americans don't want to see our reputation around the world besmirched. They don't want to see us as being the bad guys. They don't want to see our military put in harm's way for purposes that are not legitimate. And that is just not who we are as a people. And I think part of what is happening around the country, and all kudos to our candidate Afton in Tennessee, but I'd also point out we won 13 state house seats in Virginia, in many districts like that, because it is affordability. It is the fact that this administration has been so ridiculously bad about health care, Medicaid, and now the ACA tax credits. But it is also this whole culture of corruption and this kind of, I think, bringing down America's reputation in the world. And this action in the Caribbean is beyond outrageous.
And we will talk about your race. You just announced it was a big race today, and I want your thoughts on that. You know, Pete Hegseth seems to be, just to go back to Admiral Bradley, who you're going to see on Thursday. I know you've asked for him to testify. Is that something you're going to try to make happen?
We're going to start with him meeting with us, meeting with the Armed Services Committee. End of the day, though, everything I know about, I've never met Admiral Bradley. Everything I've known about him is that this has been an American hero. He's done the right things. He has supervised, special operations for a long time. My fear is this guy's getting thrown under the bus the same way this administration fired the general head of the NSA, the general that was head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, not for legitimate reasons, but for political purposes. This has never happened in America. This undermining of our intelligence community, undermining of our uniformed military, this is beyond outrageous. And I got to believe some of those voters who voted in Virginia and Tennessee, beyond affordability and health care, are also saying, this is not who we are as a country in terms of our moral fiber and what we represent to ourselves and to the world.
Do you buy that Secretary Hegseth walked out of the room after the first? That seems just hard.
Jen, I've called for this guy's resignation for months on end. If you ever got somebody that is so beyond his ability to execute, who is kind of a joke, And frankly, we hear from the military on a regular basis, you know, they don't respect this guy. This is, you know, here was a guy who was a Fox News commentator who's now lecturing the military about how to be real tough warriors, who now, when he's finally in an incident and reviewing it as Secretary of Defense, not Secretary of War, Secretary of Defense, cops out and tries to throw the admiral who's actually got the local command under the bus. That is repulsive, I think, to anyone who served, regardless whether it's military or the intel community.
It's repulsive to anyone out there. Let's talk about politics and the race. You just announced you're running for re-election.
MarkWarnerVA.com.
There you go.
Check it out. Check it out. I mean, like, you know.
That was very smooth. You've been doing this a while. As you look at the Tennessee race, I mean, Nashville, it's kind of, but it's a very Republican district. 22 points Trump won by. There are a lot of parts of Virginia that kind of have similarities to parts of Tennessee. What is your takeaway of that race and what it means?
At the end of the day, you know, as Ken Martin said, it's not about labels of centrist or moderate or progressive. It's, can you get stuff done for people? People want to hire us whether we actually can accomplish something. Not our position. Can you get stuff that changes their life? Donald Trump promised a lot. He has underdelivered on affordability. He's underdelivered on groceries. He is literally taking away health care from millions of Americans. His big ugly bill took 17 million Americans on Medicaid. He's now taking millions more, 24 million potentially, on these tax credits. And the thing that people, I think, are getting is, if somebody else loses their health care and they got to go to the emergency room, that's going to drive up everybody's costs, even if you've got private insurance. This is a bad plan. It leads to lack of affordability. And frankly, this guy's got no vision of how we go forward. One of the reasons why I'm going to ask Virginians to rehire me is because I'm a tech guy, but I think the economic dislocation that's going to come from artificial intelligence, I think at the end of the day, there's a lot of good net positive. But for the next 5 years, we've already got 9% recent college graduate unemployment. That could go to 25% because all those starter jobs coming out of college are being eliminated by AI. I think the AI guys owe an obligation to help us figure out that transition and frankly help pay for it. This whole notion, and I've been successful in business, but the whole notion that everybody at the top ought to get all the benefits of all these economic transformations is not what I think the American people are about. They want innovation. They want people to be successful. But there's got to be a sense of fair balance in this. And I think we need voices that are talking not only about affordability in healthcare, not only about restoring America's position in the world, but also how we're going to lead in innovation and get through this economic transformation with AI.
Senator Mark Warner, we covered quite a span of things there.
You didn't interrupt me that much as you used to.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining me tonight.
Thank you, Jen.
All right, coming up, the Republican candidate might be projected to win in this Tennessee special election, but the Democratic candidate is hugely overperforming in a district Donald Trump won by 22 points. It's worth pointing out, Afton Bain ran as an unapologetic progressive. I described my next guest the same way, and I'm going to talk to him about all of it coming up next. Okay, I know everybody's felt a form of political PTSD, but actually elections are happening, exciting things are happening, and tonight in Tennessee, the Democratic candidate is massively overperforming in a district Donald Trump won by 22 points last year. And if someone tells Donald Trump that this Republican win is actually a huge Republican loss, you never know. He might be up late again. He might be. We'll see. I mean, just think about what happened last night. In quite a spree that began at 9 p.m. last night and ended around midnight, Trump made nearly 160 posts lashing out at political enemies and, of course, boosting fawning messages from his supporters, obviously. That is a rate of nearly 1 post per minute, just to give you a sense. And then, believe it or not, he started back up again shortly before 6 a.m. this morning. Now, all of that social media posting in lieu of restorative sleep appeared to have taken a toll on the 79-year-old president. Earlier today, Trump appeared to be, shall we say, fighting to stay awake during a cabinet meeting. That's a very kind way of describing it. The manic posting and inability to keep his eyes open would raise questions about any 80-year-old, let alone the President of the United States. But that is all on top of many, many more questions the White House is being confronted with regarding Trump's health. including why he received an MRI scan during his physical last month and why he couldn't answer reporters when asked what part of his body the scans covered. Yesterday, the White House tried to put the speculation around that medical visit to bed, saying that the MRI was a, quote, preventative cardiovascular checkup, an explanation that is only raising more questions. As a longtime cardiologist for former Vice President Dick Cheney told the Washington Post, an MRI or CT scan is absolutely not a part of standard preventative imaging for men of Trump's age. The doctor also pointed out that Trump did not appear to undergo similar scans when he received a physical exam last April. Now, whatever Trump may or may not be going through health-wise, it's a good thing he has access to whatever care he may need, because millions of Americans could soon find themselves not so fortunate. Trump and House Republicans have still not budged at all, really, on extending subsidies for the Affordable Care Act that are set to expire at the end of this month. And if they do expire, ACA premium payments would more than double on average next year, meaning that millions of Americans would be unable to afford basic health care, let alone Trump's so-called preventative MRIs. And you wonder why Democrats are doing well in elections. I don't think you have to wonder. Joining me now is Abdul El Sayed, a Democratic candidate running for the U.S. Senate in Michigan. He formerly served as the director of the Department of Health, Human and Veteran Services for Wayne County, Michigan. There's so many things to ask you about, including your race, including Tennessee, but let me just start. You're actually a physician. You have helped patients. You've worked in public health for years. Talk to me about your reaction to the idea of a, quote, preventative MRI.
Yeah, MRIs are not things that people prescribe when you're just trying to figure something out. It's because you want to figure out something very specific. And to your point that you made earlier, I'm less worried about his MRI than I am worried about the people in the state of Michigan who cannot afford an MRI if they really need one. But I will say this, if you've forgotten why you need an MRI, that itself suggests a certain, we'll just say, cognitive deficit, which I think we will have seen in the course of his actions over the last year and will continue to see. So this is concerning for a lot of reasons. The leadership of our country and the fact that that poor leadership is about to send a lot of folks into a space where they can't get the MRIs that they need.
We've been talking all night about this special election in Tennessee. Afton Bain, who ran a great campaign, we'll see what the final margins are, but man, did she cut the margin there. It's pretty exciting. We'll keep people updated. 95% of reporting in, 53.9 to 45%. So in the single digits currently. As you look to that race, you're running yourself for the U.S. Senate in the primary. What are your takeaways from that race and why she did well?
Our plus 22 district, you have a young leader with vision who did not shy away from what she thought the world ought to be like. And I think what people are looking for from their politicians is that future vision. I think so much of our politics is about the past. We want to contest what happened a year ago or 5 years ago or 9 years ago, instead of thinking about what we want in the next 5 years or 10 years for us, for our kids, for the next generation. And I think she was giving us a sense of what that vision. Obviously, she was up against real obstacles. But this is what's possible in a lot of communities if we are willing to have the courage as a party to actually go out and fight for that vision and talk about it affirmatively and unite people behind it. And too often, I think Democrats, we show up with our little lists and our checklists and our public policy statements that are so baked and polished around what some corporate donor wants and what we think the electorate wants, that we're not here or here, we're somewhere in the middle in another region. Afton didn't do that. She actually had the courage of her convictions. She painted a vision, and she almost came within the striking distance of actually turning some part of Tennessee blue.
Burn the nationally distributed talking points. That's always my advice. Let me ask you, how do you think this applies to your race? You're running in a competitive primary. You're one of 3 candidates in that race. Why are you a better choice than the other 2?
Yeah. Look, I'm not somebody who dreamed of being a U.S. Senator. I wanted to be a doctor. And at some point, you get curious about why people get sick in the first place. And you start to think upstream, the kind of air that they breathe, the water they drink, the schools that they go to, the communities that they live in, the food that they have access to, whether or not they can walk in and see a doctor. And that's what got me into politics in the first place. I understood from the first time I ran back in 2018 that the impact of corporations buying and selling politicians to do their bidding rather than ours was the problem. I'm the only candidate in my race who's never touched a dime of corporate money. I'm also the only candidate who's running on Medicare for All. In fact, wrote the book on Medicare for All. So I'm running the kind of campaign where I am painting a vision of what we want for that future. And I'll tell you this, there was a poll that just came out today. It showed I'm within the margin of error of Mike Rogers. And let's be clear, it was a Republican poll. And anything that we're learning from this last election is that whatever they think about about where Mike Rogers may be, Michigan is going to go a lot bluer than that. But what it also showed is that I'm performing better among independents and Republicans. And you might think that a guy named Abdul in a state like Michigan might not be able to go and compete for those kinds of votes. And what we're showing is that if you're willing to talk about why folks cannot afford their health care, why their hospitals in rural and some urban areas are shutting down, why groceries are so expensive, that you can actually start to attract folks around that vision. And that's exactly what we're doing in this race. And this is what this election moment needs, and that's what we're offering.
Well, I think a lot of people out there are very excited about politics right now, or they should be, because the Democrats are winning in a lot of places right now. We're coming very close.
Right.
Jalil Saeed, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, we have to take a very quick break. There's so much going on tonight. Lawrence has Senator Adam Schiff standing by, and we'll be right back. Okay, that does it for me tonight on another exciting election night. The Last Word with Lawrence O'Donnell starts right now. Hey, Lawrence.
Jen, you know, on a special election night like this is the kind of night when you have a special House election like this that I'd really like to talk to someone who really knows the inside of the Democrat Congressional Campaign Committee, where these kinds of campaigns are masterminded. You know anyone? You know anyone I could talk to, like right now, this second?
I know a few people, Lawrence. What should we talk about?
How about you? You used to work there back in the day. This was your job, getting these people elected in special elections and in general elections in November. So I'm asking you, when a district that was just last year, the Republican won, the Republican who then retired from the House, won by 22 points. A Democrat comes in and closes it to about 10 or so. We don't know yet, but somewhere in that range. What does that tell you is going to happen a year from now in November, given that there's more than 20 House seats that Republicans won by 10 points or less?
I mean, it tells you you can expand the map. And I was talking with Ken Martin about this earlier. They can look at a larger number of districts to potentially compete in. It also tells you that the Republicans are going to have to spend a lot of money in districts that they shouldn't have to spend money in, right? Because when you spend money in a district like Tennessee 7, you don't have money to spend in other districts where you want to win seats or you're trying to compete in very close seats. It also tells you that a lot of this is, I mean, the affordability message clearly worked very effectively. Afton Ben did that. She also talked about the Epstein files, and she put it all together. I know you've talked to Ro Khanna about this, as have I, about kind of the billionaires and the elite being disconnected from the country. So that's interesting, too. If you're running out there, if you're running the DCCC, I'd look at a couple of those things, expanding the map, where they're going to have to spend money, and kind of how the message worked in a district that's quite red.
You know, I've always admitted the one thing I really, really feel like I know nothing about is who's going to win the, House of Representatives elections. And it's so complex, and predicting it is so complex. And I can never forget the election where the Republicans won back the House of Representatives for the first time in 40 years, and exactly no one predicted it. No one predicted it. And the Democrats had a huge margin in the House in those days. And that's when Newt Gingrich found himself in the speakership when the Republicans won it for the first time. And when you live through that with no one predicting it, I've just lived with the complexity of it. But tonight does seem, even to me, pretty clarifying about what to look for in November and what happens to a party the next day in the House of Representatives after a special election like this, when it goes very badly for them and you've got a bunch of members who won their seats by these narrow margins. What do they have to say the next day when everyone gets together?
Well, I suspect, and we've seen a lot of this reporting already, even before this special election, that a lot of these Republicans are going to say, do I really want to keep being a part of this? You know, they've said they feel disrespected by Mike Johnson, disrespected by the White House. Do they want to potentially be in the minority? That's a question. And it's looking very much like the excitement and the energy and the electorate out there is for that. The other thing it made me think of, Lawrence, you've covered corruption so much, and there's plenty to cover about these days, is in 2006, you remember that cycle, the Democrats won back the House? We ran on the culture of corruption. That was a big part of the message. It is massively more than that these days, and that still is something that resonates with people, no question.
Jen, so about that, you're at the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. You're trying to decide on what strategies will help individual races around the country. You know, we have former Speaker Tip O'Neill with that legendary statement of all politics is local. But in 2006, inside the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committees, did you see that there was a national issue to run on in corruption? Was that something that you could tell was actually working or was going to work?
Well, remember, it was Tom DeLay. It was the era of Tom DeLay, right? Where there was tons of corruption going on. Also, privatization of Social Security was a huge issue back then as well. And that was an issue that Democratic leadership, but also people across the country were talking about, because it was something that resonated and really connected with people. And I suspect healthcare, the cost of healthcare, these subsidies, depending on what happens, is going to be a version of that, or it could be. But also the culture of corruption and just people, the rich and the wealthy and the elite, living by a different set of rules. It's all tied together. So you did look at it. You looked at how it impacted districts and how candidates could talk about it in a way that resonated with people in their districts.
Jen, Afton Bain is speaking, so we're going to go live to Nashville, where a Democratic candidate, Afton Bain, is now addressing her crowd.
The Republicans made these districts to be uncompetitive. They wanted us to back down, and we did not back down. We showed up. Our campaign raised $2.8 million, outraising our opponent. And from everyday people, not the Billionaire Boys Club, not Trump's Billionaire Boys Club, but from nurses and teachers in Clarksville and Dixon and young people who donated $5 or $10 to get us over the finish line. We knocked on 70,000 doors. We made over 185,000 calls. We had conversations on porches and churches and gas stations. We recruited 1,500 volunteers and ran one of the largest one-day canvasses in the entire state that the state has seen in years, proving that when you speak with people with dignity and respect, they show up. And nobody in Washington believed we could get even this close. This was a 22-point race. They created these districts to be uncompetitive, but they don't understand Tennessee. They don't understand the South. They don't understand our stubborn hope of people who have been underestimated for decades. But you all understood it. You carried hope, and because of you, you put them on the run in a district they thought they could buy easy double digits, and we showed them that is not the case. And this campaign was rooted in something that's deeper than politics. We ran on an idea that government should work for working people. That families shouldn't be bankrupted by medical bills, that rural hospitals should stay open, and that healthcare costs shouldn't go up because someone in Washington wants a talking point. We ran on the belief that our story in Tennessee is bigger than the cynicism that has held this state hostage for decades. And tonight, because I believe in Southern hospitality, I called the Congressman-elect, Matt Van Epps, and I had one question for him. What will define what happens next? Do not let the Affordable Care Act subsidies expire. Do not raise healthcare costs for working families in Tennessee. But this isn't the end of our story. It's not even close. Because what we have built here in this district, this grassroots movement, is part of something bigger that is happening across the South and is happening across this country. Because we are tired of people outside of this state telling us that the South is backwards, that it's hopeless, and it's destined to be ruled by the same powerful people again and again. The South is not silent because the South has something to say. At Tennessee, we are leading the way. We have inspired an entire country. They are with us tonight, and they are so proud. They are so proud of what we were able to do. And we may not have won tonight, but we changed the story of what's possible here. And we're not done. Not by a long shot. So tomorrow, we keep fighting. Tomorrow, we keep building. Tomorrow, we keep organizing. Thank you for believing in me. Thank you for believing in each other. And thank you for believing in a South that refuses to be quiet. This campaign proved that Tennessee is full of people who want to build something better, something that belongs to all of us. So tonight isn't the end. It is the beginning of a next chapter of Tennessee and American politics. One of possibility, one of power, and one of progress for the people that we love. So thank you. Let's keep going. We're not done. Not now. Not ever. Thank you.
That was Democrat Afton Bain giving her, well, concession speech that sounded like a victory speech in Nashville tonight in a special congressional election there in a congressional district that the Republicans won by 22 points last year. She is now trailing by 9 points in the tally of the votes so far tonight. And joining us now is Congressman Jamie Raskin. He's the top Democrat on the House Judiciary Committee. And Congressman Raskin, we just heard Afton Bain say, we changed the story of what's possible. What is the story that Republicans in the House will be telling each other tomorrow about what happened tonight?
Well, in public, they'll be claiming a big victory, but in private, they will be acknowledging that this is a very sharp setback for them in the South, where you've got a 22-point Trump advantage district that is now down to 8 or 9 points. That's a remarkable turnaround to have a 14-point Democratic pickup in this rural district where, you know, Nashville was gerrymandered in order just to dilute it and overwhelm it. And suddenly they've seen that they've added huge Democratic pockets to all of these Republican districts. And you hear in Afton Bain the voice of a new interracial working class progressive populism. And she is a fighting new leader. And that's one of the great things to come out of this election is Afton Bain herself, because she's going to be a major force in Tennessee politics and politics throughout the South. But I think the other thing you're going to hear the Republicans talking about is whoa on all the gerrymandering, because unless you've got a district that's up 15, 20, 25 points, you're not going to be interested if you've got one of these 8 or 10-point districts giving 2 or 3 points away in order to try to gerrymander Democrats further into oblivion in the South, in Florida or, you know, Georgia, North Carolina, you name it. That strategy may be exhausted at this point for them because of the Democratic mobilizing that's taking place across the country, from Tennessee to Virginia to Jersey to New York to California. So I view it in the context of the last month of Democratic victories. And although the Republican won this election, it's a huge breakthrough for us in Tennessee to have these kinds of numbers, not just at the district-wide level, but if you look at each of these counties, they all have seemed to move in a blue direction.
Congressman, I want to go back to what you just said about gerrymandering, because that had not occurred to me yet in looking at these results. This is so important, and I want to let the audience hear the slow version of this to outline what it means. Because when you get into redistricting or gerrymandering from a party perspective, and you look at a state like Tennessee or Florida or Texas, and you say, we want to carve up the districts in a way that will allow us to pick up more Republican seats. What you have to do that is take some Republican voters out of the district they're in and redistribute those voters to another district. And so you first of all turn to the Republicans in your state delegation who win by giant margins, who win by, 18, 22, or win by 12. And you say to them, in effect, you don't need to win by 12. You can win by 8. You can win by 7. It'll be fine. We're going to shave off 3 or 4% of your Republican vote from your district and move it over here. And those Republicans, you're saying, are immediately saying to the people who want to do that, no, no, no. I need my 15-point margin. I need my 12-point margin. I need my 22-point margin, which is the lesson of tonight. I need my 22-point margin in order to continue to win this district. So no, you cannot redistrict this way.
And every politician knows his or her district better than anything else in the world, right? And a lot of politicians don't even like to give up points if they're in a 22% advantage district. But and that can be kind of irrational, but it's ineradicable in human nature. But after these results that we saw in Virginia and Jersey and Georgia and Tennessee tonight, somebody rationally can say, I'm only in a 10-point Republican advantage district. I know you want to squeeze out more Republican districts, but not at my expense, not if you're taking 2 or 3 points away from me. I'm not going for that. So let's hope that that can help to put up a big stop sign for what they're still trying to do across the country. I mean, another current that has really shaken them up a lot is the fact that whatever gains they thought they were making in the Latino community seemed to be dramatically eroded by the assault on our communities in the anti-immigration offensive by Trump. So 2 of the 5 districts that they wanted to try to steal in Texas belong to Democratic Latino leaders, Vicente Gonzalez and Henry Cuellar, both of whom are in fighting positive condition, and especially again after tonight, because it shows that the South is far from a foregone cause. But what they do have going for them on their side is the gerrymandering. And the other thing they've got going for them is the Supreme Court. And the other shoe has not dropped yet in the Calais case, where the Supreme Court can conceivably dismantle Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act the way that it dismembered Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. And if that happens, that means they could be targeting the lone majority African-American district in Mississippi. For example, Benny Thompson's district, they could just, cut that one in half. There are more than a dozen districts like that where they might say, well, we're no longer bound by the so-called non-retrogression principle, which is you can't turn the clock back. They will take it as a license to turn the clock back. And then, it's something like the end of Reconstruction, and we're going to be in huge political upheaval across the country if they do it. But let's hope that tonight's result really puts the brakes on their extreme gerrymandering across the country.
Congressman Jamie Raskin, thank you very much for starting off our coverage tonight.
You bet.
Thank you. And coming up, Congressman Robert Garcia, who could be the next Oversight Committee chairman if this electoral trend continues, will join us next.
And we may not have won tonight, but we changed the story of what's possible here. And we're not done. Not by a long shot. So tomorrow, we keep fighting. Tomorrow, we keep building. Tomorrow, we keep organizing.
And joining us now in our special election coverage tonight is Democratic Congressman Robert Garcia of California. He's the top Democrat on the House Oversight Committee, and if this electoral trend continues, will be the chairman of that committee in the next Congress. A 22-point district for Republicans on a normal night, and tonight she's coming within 9 points or so. What does it tell you? What does it tell the Democrats about how they should be running their campaigns in November for the House?
Well, look, I think that Donald Trump and House Republicans better watch out, because I think right now the country is onto what they're doing. The country is onto their grift. The country is onto the fact that they have betrayed their own voters. And the result tonight, but also the result that just happened last month with the governor races, with what happened in California, in my home state, with Proposition 50, all signs...
The redistricting proposition.
The redistricting measure. I mean, all signs point to a really strong 2026 for Democrats in the House, but also possibly in the Senate. So we're feeling really good, but we got to keep focused on affordability, on health care, and on taking on government corruption.
And so on that last one of government corruption, is that where the Epstein files fits in? Because the Epstein files were in this campaign, somewhat to my surprise, because the way I've been covering it here, the way you've been covering it with us here, is as an investigation, an ongoing investigation about what's really happening with this material, what we should have in this material. I have not brought to it any kind of electoral framing. I have not considered what does this do in campaigns. But Afton Bain was using it, and using it to link the Epstein files to the message that these people, these Republicans, are not for us. They're for protecting other people. And she used the Epstein files as part of that message.
I mean, that's exactly right. And you're going to see candidates across the country run on corruption and talk about the Epstein files. Why is the president guarding, safeguarding, obsessed about these files that clearly have and protect very powerful and wealthy men that have done horrific things to girls and children and women, including rape and trafficking? And so to connect corruption to what Donald Trump is doing with the Epstein files is absolutely the right approach. And you're going to see us run on taking on government corruption. Donald Trump is the most corrupt person to ever be president of the United States.
Yeah, I mean, normally the investigative part of Congress's work doesn't normally find its way into campaigns. It's just a harder thing to wrap into campaigns for people who are concerned about things like cost of living, affordability, all of those issues. But so where did you learn something? Did Democrats learn something about how the Epstein files might fit in some, maybe not all, but in some congressional campaigns?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, look, the result tonight, to shrink that margin and to shrink the advantage that Republicans had in this election is huge. And it's a huge victory on top of the victories that we just had a month ago. And I think what you're going to see across the country is folks talking about not just affordability and health care, but about taking on Donald Trump and his grift, the grift of his family, of him enriching themselves, the largest corporations. And in the center of that is Donald Trump's flip-flop on the Epstein files. I mean, people see it. When I'm back home, I'm in the barber chair or I'm at the supermarket, people are stopping me and oftentimes not asking me about the cost of groceries. They're asking me about how are we going to hold the men in the Epstein files accountable for the damage that they have done to other people and women.
Marjorie Taylor Greene, who became one of your surprising allies in trying to obtain the Epstein files, resigning from Congress, and in her resignation statement that's going to resign in January, said, I don't want to run for re-election to be elected into the minority. She has concluded that you are going to win the majority next year, and she didn't want to, among other things, just didn't want to go to work in the minority in that building.
Look, if we continue telling the story of supporting working class people, if we focus on taking on billionaires in this country, we focus on taking on the corruption of Donald Trump and his family, we are going to win the election next year. We're going to ensure that we're actually able to move an agenda forward, but it's going to take work. And I tell people all the time, look, celebrate these wins, celebrate tonight, celebrate what we did last month, but the work and the organizing has to continue all the way through the election.
So we heard from Afton Bain about her call conceding the race to the Republican candidate, and it sounded like an unusual call because normally that's a quick, polite, congratulations, good night. She says that she talked to him about extending subsidies for the Affordable Care Act, that she insisted with him in the concession call tonight that he's got to go to Washington and do that.
I look, and that's absolutely the right approach. I mean, right now, and I'm talking to Republicans and colleagues of mine, of course, in Congress, and they are scared. They are scared about their inaction. They're scared about the speaker. They're now more scared about Donald Trump and him losing his popularity across the country. And I would add a large part of that is also because of the Epstein files. And so we, I think, are at a place right now where people need to understand that we're all in this fight. The ACA protection, extending those subsidies right now is our top priority in the Congress. We have to get this done. The idea that healthcare costs are going to skyrocket for millions of Americans because Donald Trump would rather give tax breaks to billionaires, that's not what the American public want, and certainly not what Donald Trump campaigned on.
Does Donald Trump have anything to fear in you becoming the chair of the House Oversight Committee after the next election?
I'm going to be his worst nightmare, and the committee is going to hold him accountable every single day. We're not going to allow one of his crimes, his illegal actions, those of his administration, whether it's
Pam Bondi, whether it's Stephen Miller, these are folks that have caused massive harm to the public, that are violating the Constitution, that are denying people's due process rights. And Donald Trump has to be held accountable for what he's done to this country. And this idea that we're going to just forget about it or pass it along as it's some sort of dark moment in history, we have to be very clear to the next generation that this is not how government should operate, and this is not how a president should act.
Congressman Robert Garcia, and if this year's electoral pattern holds, future Chairman Robert Garcia, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. And coming up, Pete Hegseth is changing his story. He's on story number 3 now, and Donald Trump is doing the same thing that he always does when he's in trouble. That's next. The most incompetent and unqualified Secretary of Defense in history, the only one who had to pledge to stop drinking in order to win Senate confirmation, keeps changing his story. And we don't know if he stopped drinking. When publicly suspected of murder, changing your story is cause for increasing suspicion of guilt. And when your changed story is worse than your first false account, then your story cannot survive a real investigation. And now Pete Hegseth's story hinges on a new lie, the fog of war. He's claiming the fog of war, but you cannot have the fog of war without a war. And Pete Hegseth does not have a war. Pete Hegseth has gone from saying he could see very clearly what was happening when he authorized the killing of 11 people in a small boat running on outboard motors that posed absolutely no threat to the United States of America in any way, a boat that was about 1,200 miles away from the nearest point in the United States of America. He's now claiming that he couldn't see what was going on that boat because of the fog of war. Vietnam combat veterans can tell you about the fog of war. They can tell you about not knowing which direction the gunfire was coming from when it was killing their teammates. Soldiers in real combat situations in any war can tell you about the fog of war, but there is no fog in Pentagon offices where Pete Hegseth was watching that boat. And there is no fog in that video that we have seen of that small boat destroyed by an American missile under Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth's authority and under their orders. Here is Republican Senator Rand Paul's summary of Pete Hegseth's personal fog of war.
There's a very distinct statement was said on Sunday. Secretary Hegseth said he had no knowledge of this and it did not happen. It was fake news. It didn't happen. And then the next day from the podium of the White House they're saying it did happen. So either he was lying to us on Sunday or he's incompetent and didn't know it had happened.
Senator Paul knows that he doesn't have to choose between lying and incompetent. Pete Hegseth has proved he's capable of both. George Will is the dean of conservative political writers in this country and the best prose stylist of all of them. In his new Washington Post column, George Will says Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth seems to be a war criminal without a war. There was a time when George Will was the thought leader of the smartest Republicans in our government, but he has mostly given up hope of influencing Washington Republicans in the Trump era. And now, with the Washington Post reporting that Pete Hegseth authorized a second missile strike aimed at the wreckage of that small boat because there were still 2 people alive clinging to that wreckage. George Will wrote, "The killing of the survivors by this moral slum of an administration should nauseate Americans." The moral slum of the Trump administration. Donald Trump is doing what he always does when he's in trouble. He's pretending he doesn't know anything about it, except that he knows for sure that he was not involved in it. When Donald Trump was not closing his eyes and apparently nodding off in today's absurd reality show that he calls a cabinet meeting, Donald Trump insisted that he's the only president of the United States in history incapable of obtaining information about a military attack under his authority.
As far as the attack is concerned, I still haven't gotten a lot of information because I rely on Pete. But to me, it was an attack. It wasn't 1 strike, 2 strikes, 3 strikes. Somebody asked me a question about the second strike. I didn't know about the second strike. I didn't know anything about people. I wasn't involved in it. I knew they took out a boat. But I would say this, they had a strike. I hear the gentleman that was in charge of that is extraordinary. He's an extraordinary person. I'll let Pete speak about him. But Pete was satisfied. Pete didn't know about second attack having to do with two people.
Oh. So that's their new story today. Pete didn't know about the second attack. So Donald Trump, who says he hasn't gotten a lot of information about this, then gives you the crucial information, which sounds like a new invention, that Pete Hegseth didn't know about the second attack. Could have said that on Sunday. Could have said that when the story broke. The attack occurred on September 2nd. And 91 days later, Donald Trump, the oblivious president of the United States, is trying to stay awake in the cabinet room and telling you he didn't know about the second attack until the Washington Post told him about it by printing their story that Pete Hegseth first lied about and said was totally false. Now Pete Hegseth has in effect confirmed every element of the Washington Post story except that the second strike was his idea. The Washington Post reports Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth gave a spoken directive, according to two people with direct knowledge of the operation. The order was to kill everybody, one of them said. Today, Pete Hegseth came up with the new story that he had moved on to his next meeting before the second strike occurred.
I watched that first strike live. As you can imagine, at the Department of War, we got a lot of things to do. So I didn't stick around for the hour and 2 hours, whatever, where all the sensitive site exploitation digitally occurs. So I moved on to my next meeting. A couple of hours later, I learned that that commander had made which he had the complete authority to do, and by the way, Admiral Bradley made the correct decision to ultimately sink the boat and eliminate the threat. He sunk the boat, and eliminated the threat. And it was the right call. We have his back. And the American people are safer because narco-terrorists know you can't bring drugs through the water and eventually on land if necessary to the American people. We will eliminate that threat, and we're proud to do it.
So you didn't see any survivors, to be clear, after that first strike? You personally?
I did not personally see survivors, but I stand, because the thing was on fire. It was exploded in fire or smoke. You can't see anything. You got digital. This is called the fog of war.
That is not a foggy region of the Caribbean, and Pete Hegseth didn't mention that fog of war, when he first talked about it on September 3rd, the day after.
I watched it live. We knew exactly who was in that boat, we knew exactly what they were doing, and we knew exactly who they represented. And that was Tren de Aragua, a narco-terrorist organization designated by the United States, trying to poison our country with illicit drugs.
You can still see that boat after that strike that he was so proud of. There's nothing preventing you from seeing it. And that's what he said the day after the strike, when he was so proud to show that video of that murder. He's lying, of course. He's lying about who was in the boat. He can't give a single name of who was in the boat. He can't give a single age. He doesn't know if they were all men. He doesn't know if they were all adults. He doesn't know if there was a 12-year-old boy there, a 14-year-old. He has no idea. And he made sure that all the evidence of who was on that boat and what was on that boat was destroyed by his two missiles. They are evidence-destroying missiles, used in the commission of what appears to be a crime and then used for the cover-up. Use the missiles to make sure you destroy all the evidence. The Washington Post reports the protocols were changed after the strike to emphasize rescuing suspected smugglers if they survived strikes, according to 3 people. It is unclear who directed the change in protocol and when exactly it took shape. The Pentagon's war manual clearly states the requirement to refuse to comply with orders to commit law of war violations applies to orders to perform conduct that is clearly illegal or orders that the subordinate knows, in fact, are illegal. For example, orders to fire upon the shipwrecked would be clearly illegal. And so firing on those two survivors was illegal when they did it. Why would you have to change a protocol so that it would comply with the Pentagon manual? Quote, orders to fire upon the shipwrecked would be clearly illegal. So there is no doubt, if the Washington Post reporting is true, that the firing of that second missile was illegal, according to the actual words of the Pentagon's own manual. There is now hope for real congressional investigations this year because the Democrats take over the House of Representatives next year, and that conduct will be investigated even further. But right now, the hope for congressional investigations this year depends on the Republican chairs of the House and Senate Armed Services Committees conducting those investigations. And this is what the Senate Republican Armed Services Committee Chairman Roger Wicker said today.
Were there survivors who were killed in that second attack?
I don't have that information.
Do you worry?
But I do think we'll get that information, and we're certainly going to have available to us all of the audio and all of the video. And at that point, I'll be able to have a more informed conversation with the press.
Do you worry it could be a war crime if the survivors were killed?
We're going to find out what the true facts are, and then there'll be a determination about that.
And today, the Washington Post reports that the White House's comments yesterday that it was Admiral Bradley who ordered the second strike, quote, elicited a furious backlash within the Defense Department, where officials described feeling angry at the uncertainty over whether Hegseth would take responsibility for his alleged role in the operation or leave the military and civilian staff under him to face the consequences. This is Protect Pete BS. One military official who, like others, spoke on the condition of anonymity to discuss internal conversations, told the Post. Press Secretary Leavitt's statement left it up to interpretation who was responsible for the second strike that killed the two survivors, a separate military official said. One official said of Leavitt's statement, it's throwing us, the service members, under the bus. Another person said some of Hegseth's top civilian staff appeared deeply alarmed about the revelations and were contemplating whether to leave the administration. After this break, Senator Adam Schiff will join us. Former Fox legal analyst Andrew Napolitano said this about his friend Pete Hegseth today.
It gives me no pleasure to say what I'm about to say because I worked with Pete Hegseth for 7 or 8 years at Fox News. This is an act of a war crime, ordering survivors who the law requires be rescued instead to be murdered. There's absolutely no legal basis for it. Everybody along the line who did it, from the Secretary of Defense to the Admiral to the people who actually pulled the trigger, should be prosecuted for a war crime for killing these two people.
Joining us now is Democratic Senator Adam Schiff of California. He's a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Senator, thank you very much for joining us tonight. What is your legal view of the state of the evidence so far?
Well, I think it's important to remember that all of this campaign, this military campaign, is unlawful, unconstitutional. Congress has not authorized these actions. There's no imminent threat of invasion or attack from Venezuela. So all of this is unlawful. But if there was an order to deliberately kill these two survivors, that moves unlawful, unconstitutional into the realm of war crimes. And it was interesting watching that press conference with the president and Hegseth, where he appears to read carefully worded language along the lines of the Admiral took action to destroy the ship and eliminate the threat. And I think the reason he worded it that way, the reason probably lawyers told him to word it that way, is they want to, I think, try to distinguish, oh no, they weren't trying to kill the survivors, they were just trying to destroy the boat they were on. That's a very flimsy read, I think, to try to hang their hat on. If indeed Hegseth ordered for all these people to be killed, and the Admiral acted on that order, whether Hegseth was in the room or he wasn't in the room, and I think you're right to be entirely skeptical of any claim Hegseth makes about what he knew or didn't know, But if he gave the order to kill everyone, then he is responsible for the killing of those survivors and a potential war crime. I think the only way we get to the bottom of this is by analyzing the video, audio if it exists, but also having the admiral testify and others who were present testify so that we can hear firsthand what did they see, what did they know, what were the orders, what action did they take.
Well, we just heard Roger Wicker, the Senate Armed Services Committee chairman, say in no uncertain terms that he and the committee are going to see every bit of video and they're going to hear every bit of audio. They're going to get, he's determined to get all of that evidence, and he does have the power to do that.
He certainly has the power to do it, and I hope that he will. I think he seems very serious about it, and I know Roger, I think he's determined. Will the administration provide it? Will they need to somehow subpoena it? Are they willing to go to the mat to fight the administration for that? Are they going to go beyond privately interviewing the admiral? Will they conduct a public hearing? Will they allow the public to see the video and audio so that it's not described to us by third parties? There's a lot of variation in what kind of oversight, how rigorous it can be. If it's going to enjoy the public confidence, I think it has to be done out in the open. And I hope on a bipartisan basis that they will persevere and insist on public hearings and public disclosure of all the evidence.
It does seem that we will eventually get there, either through this year's, coming year's hearings in the House and the Senate in investigations, or when the Democrats control at least the House of Representatives, as they are likely to after next year's election, and then you will see unencumbered investigations of this sort of thing. And then, of course, there is the next presidency. If the next presidency has a Democratic administration with an attorney general chosen by a Democratic president, this is a criminal investigation that could be open on day one.
I think all that is very true, and it's part of the reason why Senator Kaine, myself, Rand Paul, have introduced resolutions and may introduce yet another to make it clear that Congress is not authorizing these actions. These actions expose our service members to physical harm, but as we made the case the last time we brought up one of these war powers resolution, it also exposes these service members to legal harm, to legal exposure, and now we see that so graphically with what's taken place. But yes, Lawrence, you know, one way or another, one time or another, we will get to the bottom of this. I am concerned in the near term that the president saying he's closing off or trying to close off airspace above Venezuela, his more leaning into statements that we're going to strike land. This would be, you know, another potential opportunity for Trump to push this issue of a potential war crime off the front and center and bring about a conflict with Venezuela to focus the country's attention on that instead. I'm not saying that's what he will do, but nevertheless, we have seen this president engage in reckless conduct as a way of distracting from his other problems.
Senator Adam Schiff, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thanks, Lawrence.
Thank you. And tonight's last word about Giving Tuesday is next. As most of you know, today is Giving Tuesday, and on Giving Tuesday, we always hope you'll remember the Kind Fund, the partnership I created with UNICEF to provide desks for schools in Malawi and scholarships for girls to attend high school in Malawi, where public high school is not free. You can contribute any amount at lastworddesks.ms.now. That is tonight's last word. The 11th hour with Stephanie Ruhle starts now.
Tonight, a Democratic candidate makes a surprising showing in a deep red House district in Tennessee, coming close to flipping a Republican stronghold. Then Pete Hegseth defends the deadly strike on an alleged drug boat in the Caribbean, claiming he didn't see survivors in the water. And the president weighs in on the issue of affordability, calling it, quote, a con job and a fake narrative created by Democrats as the 11th hour gets underway on this Tuesday night. Good evening once again. I am Stephanie Rule, and we are now just 335 days away from the midterms. But this evening, all eyes are on Tennessee's 7th district, which is holding a special election to fill its House seat. This is a district that Donald Trump won by 22 points just 1 year ago. But this evening, it was a much, much closer race. The NBC News decision desk can project that the Republican, Matt Van Epps, has defeated the Democrat, Afton Bain, but right now the margin is only about 9 points. So while the Democrats did not gain a seat, they did come a whole lot closer to Republicans in a ruby red district ahead of next year's midterms. So let's get smarter with the help of our lead-off panel and dig into this. Daniela Diaz is here, congressional reporter for Notice. Larry Sabato, director at the Center for Politics at University of Virginia, professor and presidential historian. And Mark McKinnon joins us, former advisor to both George W. Bush and John McCain. Larry, just a few minutes ago, we heard from the Democrat, Afton Bain, and I want to share a little bit of it.
And we may not have won tonight, but we changed the story of what's possible here. And we're not done. Not by a long shot. So tomorrow, we keep fighting. Tomorrow, we keep building. Tomorrow, we keep organizing.
Larry, what are your reactions?
Well, my reaction is that it's always better to win than to lose, but this particular victory for the Republicans is unimpressive. It's flat. It shows a shift of 12 or 13 points in the Democratic direction compared to Trump's win in 2024. And if this kind of shift is maintained, the magnitude of it to next year's midterm elections, Democrats would certainly take over the House of Representatives. I wouldn't want to wager a guess on the Senate, but I bet the Senate would get a lot closer too.
Mark, what do you think?
Well, I think a couple of things. One is that it is obviously a very red district that was gerrymandered to protect Republicans. And so it should have been a very safe win. And the candidate Republicans had, from what I've heard, was a pretty good candidate. I mean, he's sort of central casting, military background, et cetera. And the Democratic candidate, while she ran a very good campaign, had some very difficult things in her background, like on a podcast saying that she hated Nashville and hated country music in a district that represented Nashville. That's a tough thing to overcome. And yet she still improved the margin by 10 or more points. So but when you net it out, what this really means for Republican members of Congress, unless you won your seat by a lot more than 12 points, you're looking around and saying, gee, you know, this means that if I only won my race by 12 points, that it's a dead even race come the midterms. And that's assuming that things don't get worse, which they're likely to.
That's sort of my question here, Daniela. We saw Republicans really go all out here to try to support this race, and they were on the defense, right? Mike Johnson traveled to Tennessee. The president himself called in multiple times. Don Jr. was going after this. Tonight, are they just breathing a sigh of relief, or are they not panicked, but really refocusing what they need to do between now and the midterms?
Stephanie, this was a major wake-up call for Republicans. I mean, the fact that they even had Speaker Mike Johnson in this district on Monday night having to campaign for Congressman-elect Van Epps, he won the race, is a huge sign that they were incredibly concerned about what this race could mean going into next year when they're going to have a really big fight to keep their majority. I mean, the fact that President Donald Trump had a teletown hall, that really shows you the concern and the warning signs that they felt going into this. And of course, they're breathing a sigh of relief. This is a race that they were able to win, but it is not the race that they were hoping to win, considering it was only right now, as we know, by 9 points, when this is a district that Donald Trump won by 22 points last year. So this is a major sign of what's to come in the midterms. They're aware of that. I mean, this is just what's come after Virginia and New Jersey and what we saw in those elections just a couple of weeks ago too, Stephanie.
Larry, then do you think this election was about this particular race between these two candidates, or was it a referendum on the direction of the country under Trump?
Well, it's always a mixture, and I think special elections are special in that people have a chance to vote with a large perspective on the big issues, whether it's affordability or what Trump is doing in a whole wide range of areas. You have to mix the two together, but it's a partial term, so people don't necessarily take it as seriously as they would a full term, and they also recognize that the eyes of the nation are upon them, so they're more inclined to look from a broader national perspective. So I would put more emphasis on that side, and in that sense, while the Republican won, Trump has had a lot of controversies recently, and I think it dampened the Republican margin.
Mark, then what are the lessons tonight?
Well, first of all, I disagree with Larry just a little bit, which I very rarely do. I believe that a lot has changed since Tip O'Neill said that all politics are local. I think increasingly in any federal elections, almost all politics are national now. They're all being driven by Trump. Democrats have done a very good job on driving an affordability message, which the Democratic nominee did here, and I think that's a big part of it. So I think that the Democrats realize that they've got some wind at their back. I think they've gotten very focused. The Democrats have discovered water in the desert, and that water is the message of affordability. So I think that the Republicans are going to try and turn it around, but that's going to be very difficult because they face the health care extensions, which they're not going to vote to do. So that's going to be a double whammy for voters who have a very difficult time in this current economy, and then they face their doubling, tripling, or more of their health care subsidies. It's going to be very difficult. So I think the lesson here is that the Democrats, are getting focused, and Republicans have got some real challenges ahead.
Daniela, behind the scenes, what are Republicans telling you? Not just about tonight's election, because hopefully you're not talking to too many this late at night, but what we're about to face with health care, what we're headed for, a very expensive holiday season.
It's concerning for Republicans heading into, not only do they have a huge problem with affordability, something Democrats have, we talked about this, Stephanie, done really well on the messaging in the past couple of weeks. But right now there's a major debate happening in Congress. I mean, I was just there a few hours ago on Capitol Hill talking to Republicans about what they're going to do about these expiring Affordable Care Act tax credits that they know that a lot of battleground district Republicans need to be able to win their races next year. They still don't have a plan. This is something that's going to raise prices, continue to raise prices for Americans. And this is in the background of what we're talking about with this special election, what we saw a couple weeks ago in New Jersey and Virginia, as they're trying to figure out how to keep prices lower for Americans so they can get reelected. And look, right now I can say, Stephanie, it's a mess on Capitol Hill when it comes to this issue. There is no plan. They have not figured this out yet.
All right, Larry, then with 11 months to go from the midterms, what are the trends that you're tracking?
Well, obviously, we're tracking the margins in these special elections, including state legislative elections. You can actually tell a lot from them. It's not just the occasional House of Representatives special. And so far, Democrats have done remarkably well in places that are normally hostile to them. I don't think they're going to convert a lot of Republicans. I don't think they're going to win a lot of Republican seats. Today, I think you could look forward to a Democratic majority in the mid-220s, maybe if they were very lucky, 230, low 230s perhaps. And in this era, that's a substantial majority. We're not going to see those 250-seat majorities on either side anymore. So it's good for Democrats, but they have to keep the pressure up, and they have to depend on something they can't fully control, but I think can still count on, and that's Donald Trump being constantly controversial and offending lots of people.
Then, Mark, given all of the above, do you see more Republicans going the way of Marjorie Taylor Greene or doubling down and heading to Mar-a-Lago for the holiday season?
I was just going to go there, Stephanie. So if you're a Republican member of Congress and you're looking at the midterms, first of all, historically, the party in power usually loses seats. So you look at that, you add on the fact that it's a terrible economy, and you look at what's happening with retirements, and there's a huge number. I mean, the Republican retirements versus Democratic retirements are double. I think it's 30 plus already. So again, if you're a Republican looking at tonight's results and you think, God, I'm probably not going to be in the majority. I've got a really tough race unless I won my race by big double digits. And it's just not much of a fun place anymore, even if I was in the majority, and I'm probably not going to be. So I think we're going to see a lot more retirements. And also, by the way, the whole scheme to redistrict these districts, not in a 10-year cycle, I think is blowing up on the Republicans because, first of all, the Democrats have done a very good job, like in California, of sort of going tit for tat. But also, the Republican court turned down the Republican measures. So that whole thing may actually end up favoring Democrats.
I don't know. It's a fun place if you're one of those members of Congress who uses the information that you have because you're a sitting member of Congress to buy and sell stocks all day. They seem to be having fun. Danielle, let's stay on Mark's point about Republicans retiring. Regardless of this election, we are seeing a lot of Republicans leave Congress early. How concerned is Mike Johnson about potentially losing his majority even before the midterms hit?
Incredibly concerned, Stephanie. I mean, this is a digit majority, and it's really down to just now a handful of members to be able to keep this majority. And if more retire, it's unprecedented. It's unclear what that would look like if there's more Democrats than Republicans in office, even if Republicans have the majority. I mean, this has been an issue that, of course, then Speaker Kevin McCarthy faced. I covered that when that was happening, and he also was facing unprecedented amounts of Republican retirements. Now it's Speaker Mike Johnson. But the reality here is the mood on Capitol Hill, being a politician right now, has never felt worse. And Republicans are feeling very not motivated by the fact that they're in office, and they're not eager to face these tough re-elections that they're going to have in a midterm election with a Republican president, statistically, that tends to go for the opposite party if you look back at what has happened in past elections. So when you go to Capitol Hill, as I do every day, it's clear that no one's excited, no one's happy. Especially after unprecedented historical shutdown, where not really anything was solved.
All right, let's talk about the president's cabinet meeting today. He appeared, it was on video, he appeared to struggle to stay awake in the same meeting where he was furious, ranting about reports about his stamina waning. What do you make of this, Mark?
Well, a lot. I mean, well, I think it's really getting under his skin. And there's just a reality to it. I mean, we've talked about this before, Stephanie, quite a bit about you're just not as good at 80 as you are at 65. And I'll tell you one thing about this problem, Stephanie, it ain't going to get better. And there's 3 years to go, and it's just going to get worse. So if he's having trouble staying awake 1 year in, just imagine what this is going to be like a year from now.
Larry, we also heard the president take his rants against foreign-born people living here to a new level. How is this going to expand his voter base? Because, again, many people have agreed with Donald Trump about illegal immigration, that wanted to slow what's happening at the border without a doubt. The ICE raids, not so much. And now to go against people who are simply not born in this country, where's the political strategy behind this?
It's pure base. He just wants to maximize his support among the base. He wants to make them as intense as they can possibly get, make their turnouts as high as possible for the midterm elections. But that isn't enough. It isn't enough to do well. It probably isn't enough to hold the House. I mean, look at what they had to put into this Tennessee 7 race. And it's an overwhelmingly Republican district, ruby red, and a 9-point victory is simply not very impressive. So he's going to say and do what he's going to say and do. I think he's increasingly alienating independents and moderate Republicans. There aren't that many of them anymore, but there are enough to make a difference in some districts. This is not America. We're all seeing these video clips. We're reading about these horror stories of people being arrested, even American citizens or legal immigrants being arrested and treated very badly and exported because they are, quote, illegal aliens. This is not America, and it's not the America that most of us have known for our lifetimes. And that is having an impact too, and it is overwhelmingly negative outside of Trump's base.
All right, one more topic before I let you all go. We know Congress is planning to look into this boat strike report, but it sounds like Trump and Hegseth are standing firm, or at least with what their story is today. Where do you think this is headed, Daniela?
Well, there's going to be congressional probes. Stephanie, I was on, as I've mentioned a zillion times now, Capitol Hill, and you can hear from Republican senators. I'm talking Tom Tillis, Rand Paul, even sharing concerns about who knew what did they know, what did Hegseth know? There's been a lot of discrepancies in what we've heard about that September boat strike and who allowed that to happen, especially with the survivors that were still there. There's going to be a lot of questions surrounding this, and senators want answers. As we know, that's what Congress does, is do these probes into these issues, and they're not letting this go. I mean, this has been the issue for the past couple of days. Regardless of whatever is happening across politics in the country, defense hawks want answers on this issue, and they're not going to stop until they hear, especially Democrats. But really, when you're hearing from Republicans, that's a warning sign.
Mark, what do you think?
Well, it's really something when George Will, the great conservative columnist, points out that we have a Secretary of War, who now is potentially a war criminal, and there's not even a war. Listen, there was huge concern about, and has been about Pete Hegseth since the confirmation hearings, since the initial appointment. That's only just gotten worse and worse and worse. So this is just going to, at the very least, serve to be a huge distraction and a lot more heat on Hegseth. And I think that there's a lot of Republican members who have never been happy with Hegseth and will just use this as an opportunity to try and push him out.
We'll be watching. Mark, thank you. Larry, great to see you. Daniela, thank you as well. Coming up later in the hour, you're going to want to stick around. Is the president's sweeping tariff agenda on the rocks? Why a lawsuit from Costco is a bad sign for Trump's tariffs. But first, right after the break, lawmakers are ramping up, we were just talking about it, ramping up their investigations into a deadly double-tap strike on an alleged drug boat in the Caribbean, as the Secretary of Defense is insisting that all the strikes were justified. The latest on this growing scandal, the 11th hour just getting underway on a big Tuesday night in NYC.